In the student dorm room, the desks and chairs were neatly arranged with books. And on the bunk bed, Lam On was still curled up in her blanket, chattering away at her phone. On the other side, her two roommates looked at her with murderous eyes, feeling extremely restless inside. What should they do now? They really wanted to beat her up. One of them clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. Are you still not going to do anything? The demon inside me is about to break loose. Then both of them shouted together, Lam On, if you don't get up for class right now, you're going to be late. The scream was so loud that Lam On jolted in shock, her face full of confusion, and even flung her phone. She froze. Little cutie, oh no, it's class time already. Outside, under the blue sky and white clouds, the bell had already rung in front of the classroom. Lam ein hudiden zan in sai. And by then the students were already sitting properly in class, while she was still panting as she said, made it. Ka AI followed behind her and immediately remarked, and you're not even embarrassed saying that? You were almost late. But Lam On only smiled and replied, but I still made it, didn't I? Once Lam On sat down at her desk, she immediately noticed a boy with a cold, distant air walking into the classroom. Lam On stared at him without blinking as he walked from the classroom door to his seat. So it was Nanmak. He went to sit near the window, his eyes full of unspoken thoughts, propping up his chin as he gazed into the distance. Then the teacher walked in and said, Everyone, let's begin class. Thank you for choosing Teacher Duong's course. Life science is about the continuation of life. Since today is the first lesson, how about you all introduce yourselves so I can remember your faces? After that came a wave of whispers. No way. Teacher, don't remember me. I still want to skip class. Teacher, can we watch a movie instead? Just as no one was responding, Lam On enthusiastically stood up. My name is Lam On, Lam as in blue, and On as in on. The moment she finished, the other students burst out laughing. Ka AI, who sat beside On, also covered her mouth as she laughed and said, Your name really makes people think of chirping birds. Amid the sound of birds chirping and the hilarious atmosphere, the student sitting by the window suddenly stood up and spoke. Nan Mak, with his cold demeanor, made the entire room fall silent. At that moment, On was stunned, her eyes wide and round, her face blank. Wait, this voice sounds so familiar. Nan Mak stood there coolly, one hand in his pocket, and the teacher quickly reminded him, Student Nan, please sit down. But suddenly On cried out in shock, Wait, classmate, what Nan is your name written with? And what Mac? The question left the whole class bewildered. Ka AI, sitting beside her, panicked and tugged at On's sleeve. Now is not the time for your weird personality to flare up. Don't embarrass yourself. Sit down. But On still stared at Nan Mac with wide eyes and a furrowed brow, thinking, hurry up and say it. Say a few more words so I can hear. Nan Mac only looked at her indifferently, while the teacher awkwardly forced a smile and gestured as he reminded her, Student On, you can ask private questions later. But just then, Nan Mac spoke with an annoyed expression. Yin as in salt, yin as in yama, yin as in heat, nan as in color, Mac as in yin. While the two were facing off behind Nan Mac, two girls whispered among themselves, Are the flirting tricks girls use nowadays all this novel? Her courage is really admirable. I truly respect her. At that moment, On froze. That's right, this voice was absolutely right. It was him. It had to be him. But Ka AI beside her tugged her hand and made her sit down. All right, if you like him, you can always chase after him after class. I really can't with you. Meanwhile, the girl beside them rested her chin in her hand and wondered, Why do I feel like the idea that he hates you is just my illusion? As for Lam On, she only focused on Nan Mac's back as he sat there with his chin propped up, looking out the window. That clear, pure voice from just now, it had to be him. There was no way she had heard wrong. A while later, the bell rang. Teacher Duong stood at the front of the class and announced the end of the lesson. As the students began to leave, On noticed that Nan Mac was standing up, preparing to leave his desk. You guys go on ahead. I have something to do. Seeing this, Ka AI smirked. Off to chase a cute guy, huh? And the girl beside her widened her eyes dreamily. Spring really is the season for going into heat. On ran out into the crowded stream of people, looking around for Nan Mac. Right after that, she spotted him and pointed as she shouted, Nan Mac, stop right there. Hearing the yell, Nan Mac halted and turned his head back. Then Anon walked over, grabbed his wrist, and dragged him away. Come with me. The two of them then went to the quiet corridor behind the classroom, where there were only rows of green trees along the road. At that moment, Anon pinned Nan Mac against the wall. Glaring up at him, Nan Mac frowned and asked, "What exactly do you want?" It seemed as though Anon was about to settle some score with him, but unexpectedly, her gaze gradually changed into sparkling admiration. "Great God, Chuba, I'm your fan." Nan Mac asked in surprise. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." "Lam ang my." "Really?" She stood on tiptoe, then reached up to stroke Nan Mac's chin as she acted out lines from script. "Little cutie, hurry and throw yourself into my arms." "Tong Zheng, you really are a jerk. You promised me you would only love me for the rest of your life." Hearing that, Nan Mac broke out in a cold sweat. Lam Anon beamed and continued, "Great God, Chuba, I know every radio drama you've ever dubbed by heart. Your voice is like the blood flowing through my body now. There's absolutely no way I could have mistaken it. And there's also Tan Kong AI Van Lai too." Nan Mac shouted in embarrassment. "All right, what do you want?" Anon smiled brightly and reassured him, "Don't worry, I won't leak this secret to anyone." Hearing that, he looked at her skeptically, when suddenly she proposed, "Great God, Chuba, I have one tiny request. I wonder if you could agree to it." A little later, back in the girls' dormitory, Anon blushed as she thought, "I can't believe Great God Chuba is actually such a shy person in real life. He's nothing like I imagined at all." She then opened her phone and saved the contact as Little Cutie, then hesitated over whether to press confirm. At the same time, over on Nan Mac's side, he also opened his phone to look and recalled how Lam Anon had just asked, "Great God Chuba, I have a tiny request. I wonder if you could agree to it?" About being my voice boyfriend. Having classmate Nan Mac, the male god of the Music Academy, dub a boys' love radio drama for me. Only I know, heaven knows, earth knows. The gods won't know, and the ghosts won't hear. How about it? Nan Mac was dumbfounded. How could someone recognize that he was Chuba just from a few words alone? Suddenly, his phone rang, and Anon said happily, "Hee, great God Chuba, this is the first phone call I've ever made to you." In a low voice, he asked, "What is it?" She exclaimed in surprise, Great God, Chuba's voice over the phone sounds completely different. Your current voice state feels like I'm talking to Lord Tongzheng." Hearing that, his mood instantly crashed. "If there's nothing important, I'm hanging up." She immediately said, "There is. Great God, Chuba, I want to hear the breakup scene between Lin Mu and Tongzheng." On the other end of the line, Nan Mac shouted, "No way." Immediately, Anon pretended to act. "Girls, did you hear? The male god of the academy, Nan Mac, is..." Hearing that, he lost his nerve and instantly agreed. "Fine, I agree." Having gotten her way, she was secretly pleased, while Nan Mac fell silent in thought. Embarrassed, he thought, "I can't believe I have to say such shameful lines to a woman." Then he began to perform the lines. "Tong Zheng, I won't believe you anymore. I like you, but that doesn't mean I can give up my dignity for you and trample all over myself. Let's break up." Lam Anon was so excited listening to it that she squealed, "You were once the man I loved most." After reading it, he said awkwardly, "Is this enough now?" Having gotten her wish, she nodded repeatedly. Suddenly, a noise sounded from outside. Nan Mac opened the door and asked, "What is it?" When Nan Mac stepped into the room, he froze. "You guys?" Seeing their classmate reenacting the scene, one of them raised a hand in refusal while covering his face with the other as if pretending to be heartbroken. "We understand everything." Nan Mac was stunned, his jaw hanging open. His classmate bit on a tissue and wiped at his tears. "If we hadn't accidentally overheard it, we would never have known you were hiding so much suffering in your heart." Hearing that, Nan Mac was even more stunned and stammered, Suffering. The classmate folded his arms, closed his eyes, and smirked, then suddenly glared in anger. "I can imagine it. In order to hide your differences, you must have always been extremely careful, never letting us find out." Then the other two classmates joined in acting. The guy in a green shirt with red hair tightly grabbed his classmate's hand. "Can we go public?" But the one playing the female role immediately put on a pained expression. "No, I don't want my friends to all distance themselves from me. I'm afraid of being alone." Just as the story was getting gripping, the classmate from before burst into tears again. "A love that you can't confide in or share with others. How heartbreaking that must be. You've sacrificed so much for this relationship." Then in the end, the classmate in green pulled the female lead into his arms again. Listen to my explanation. But he was rejected with struggling and resistance. I don't want to hear it. I like you, but that doesn't mean I can give up my dignity and torment myself for you. Let's break up. After finishing the performance, another classmate walked up to Nan Mac and shouted, "Little Mac Mac, this isn't your fault. It's that scumbag man who was blind. There are plenty of fish in the sea, so why cling to one blade of grass? Cheer up, little Mac Mac. We'll be your strongest support." At that moment, Nan Mac panicked and stammered, "You guys misunderstood. I'm not." Before he could finish, his friend rushed over and hugged him while crying. "Oh, my little Mac Mac, we're all brothers here. No need to explain. Don't be sad. Don't be heartbroken. A breakup is just like a tribulation. Once you overcome it, you'll ascend to immortality." The other two friends standing outside added fuel to the fire by nodding vigorously. Right. Then the classmate grabbed Nan Mac's hand tightly and comforted him with a sincere look. "If you really can't get over the pain of heartbreak, I can sacrifice myself to help you." At that moment, the other two standing outside were dumbfounded, mouths agape and eyes wide. While Nan Mac looked like he wanted to throw up, his face twisted. He waved both hands in refusal, only managing to make a sound in his throat. And no need. After which Nan Mac fearfully opened the door and fled. "I have something to do. I'm leaving first." At that moment, his classmates were still standing there in shock, but they received only a wink from the guy in the green shirt. The next day, the sky was clear and sunny, sunlight streaming through the glass, accompanied by the melodious sound of a piano. Nan Mac was sitting at the piano with the students in class seated below. As Nan Mac played, his expression looked rather pensive, while the students below whispered among themselves. "It's only been a week, and he can already play this well. He must have professional training. If Nan Mac is the demonstration model, we're done for." At the same time, Anon stood outside the door, observing through the glass window. She paused because of the music and thought, "He's amazing. His looks are directly proportional to his talent." Just then, as if sensing someone outside, Nan Mac suddenly turned around. Anon hurriedly hid behind the door in panic. "Great God, Chuba is really incredible. I almost got caught. If I don't suddenly rush up to him, he probably won't get mad, right? But yesterday he suddenly hung up on me. Something must have happened. I have to ask clearly." A little later, when the class was leaving the room, Anon was already waiting outside. Nan Mac came out last together with a friend, and he immediately noticed Anon waving at him from afar. His classmate reminded him, "A really cute girl is waving at you. Do you know her?" But with his usual cold attitude, hands in his pockets, Nan Mac said no. Hearing that, his classmate believed it even less. Smirking, he slung an arm over Nan Mac's shoulder. "If you don't know her, why are you so nervous? Don't tell me she's one of your admirers. Let's go check it out." He thought to himself, such a cute girl, what a pity. Seeing how uncomfortable Nan Mac looked, the friend cheerfully ran over to Anon. "Classmate, what's your name? Which academy are you from? What year are you in? What's your relationship with Nan Mac?" Anon smiled and answered, "I'm also from a music academy, vocal department, second year. Me nim es lam anyang." "You're Chiu." Before she could finish, Nan Mac grabbed her hand and pulled her away, while she was still shouting, "Bah," leaving the classmate utterly stunned before he angrily yelled, "Little brat." Anon was dragged away by Nan Mac past a group of girls, and among them someone cried out regretfully, "No way. Who's the girl next to Nan Mac?" "No idea. It's my first time seeing her." "Don't tell me she's his new girlfriend." Elsewhere, a trio were chanting among themselves, their expressions making them look very much like school queen bees. One gritted her teeth and said, "She actually dares break the rules of the music academy. Unforgivable." Another stood with her hands on her hips, glaring. Exactly. Nan Mac is everyone's male god. How could he be monopolized by her alone? A little later, Nan Mac took Anon to a corner behind the garden. Anon was out of breath, her head spinning. "Oh, why are there so many stars? What are you doing?" Just then, Nan Mac coldly braced one hand against the wall and pinned Anon there, making her blush in shock as she called out, "Tuba," but he immediately covered her mouth with his hand. "You can't call me that in public." "Got it." Only after Anon signaled her agreement with her hand did Nan Mac let go. But then he noticed that something seemed to be hiding behind the wall. He turned to leave, but Anon tugged at his sleeve. Nan Mac, why did you suddenly hang up yesterday? Did something happen?" Nan Mac's whole face turned red again as he thought about his roommates reenacting the scene. He only answered, "Nothing happened. My phone ran out of battery and turned off by itself." As he spoke, Nan Mac started walking away. Anan followed right behind him, thinking, could it be because he was embarrassed? But then she paused because of a sound coming from behind the wall, and quickly turned back to check, yet found nothing. She just felt that something was a little off. Then she walked beside him and asked, Nan Mac, can we do the dubbing for Tan Kong AI Van Lai today? But in his cold voice, he replied, I'm busy today. No time. Ang imeditan look di sapon. I see. Then it can't be helped. Tomorrow then. As the two of them gradually walked away from the back garden, behind them were three heads peeking out from behind the wall, watching them with the faces of hungry wolves. Just you wait. Under the lush green shade of the trees, Anan walked along absent-mindedly while thinking, I'm clearly already a second-year senior. As a senior, a small task like moving things should obviously be left to the new members of the manga club. Am I really being hated by the club president? But she did not know that she had fallen into the eyes of the domineering trio in the school. At once, Anan spotted one of the girls in the group. Wasn't that AI Tuong, the second-year girl from yesterday? AI Tuong sneered when she saw her. I didn't think I'd run into you again so soon. Good. Saves me the trouble of coming to find you myself. The girl beside her covered her mouth and laughed wickedly. A lone little white rabbit is bound to get eaten by a big bad wolf. AI Tuong immediately strode forward, pointed at Anan, and shouted, You there in front, stop right now. Anan turned around in surprise. She looked around blankly to make sure they had the right person, then pointed at herself and asked, Me? AI Tuong put her hands on her hips, glared, and yelled, You're the one who waited for Nan Mac outside the piano class from yesterday, right? Hearing that, Anan froze, not understanding what was going on at first. Then she remembered meeting Nan Mac after class. Seeing AI Tuong's aggressive attitude, she could tell they had no good intentions. Could it be they found out about me using his voice as my boyfriend? Did they come specifically on Nan Mac's behalf to teach her a lesson? Did that mean Nan Mac's identity as a voice actor had already? AI Tuong, still fuming, marched up and grabbed Anan by the collar. What exactly is your relationship with him? Are you two dating? Anan, clutching a stack of papers in her arms, jerked back awkwardly. Dating? How is that possible? But AI Tuong kept glaring and shouted, Not dating? We all saw you acting intimate with Nan Mac behind lecture hall number 1. Don't even think about lying. Looking flustered, Anan tried to explain, Please calm down first. It's all just a misunderstanding. She thought to herself, so this was the misunderstanding they meant. Then the classmate standing beside AI Tuong crossed her arms and snapped, If you're not dating him, then stay away from Nan Mac. AI Tuong immediately added, That's right. Then the girl next to her chimed in too. Nan Mac is everyone's idol. No one gets to fight over him. That's been the rule at the conservatory all along. The moment she spoke of Nan Mac, her eyes sparkled like stars. Then she turned to Anan and pointed at her loudly. You'd better know your place. Why have I never heard of such a rule? The other three were so angry they nearly exploded and screamed. What? How annoying. AI Tuong rolled up her sleeves and ground her teeth, but suddenly footsteps approached and a voice shouted, Stop right there. It was so Duong, calm and composed, wearing glasses and an elegant shirt, one hand in his pocket as he walked over. Let go of my girlfriend. AI Tuong, still clutching Anan's collar, turned around in shock. Senior So Duong. So Duong walked over and pulled AI Tuong's hand away from Anan. Let go. At first it seemed like AI Tuong would retreat, but instead she glared at Anan through gritted teeth. So you really are two-timing. You horrible girl. Anan was left utterly dumbfounded, her mouth hanging open. Senior, you just said. Before she could finish, so Duong covered her mouth with his hand and gave AI Tuong a warning glare. From now on, I suggest you stay away from my girlfriend. I don't know who that kid in Mac is, and I don't care if you want to protect him. But Anan is my girlfriend. No one is allowed to bully her. Standing there with the other two girls, AI Tuong still answered arrogantly. This is a matter for our conservatory. It has nothing to do with you. I'd advise you not to stick your nose into other people's business. But she immediately fell silent, wary of the blazing look in So Duong's eyes. AI Tuong quickly looked away, meddling in other people's business. Let's go. The three of them left, but not before muttering insults under their breath. She's obviously the flirty type. Boss, don't worry. One day Lord Nan Mac will see her true colors. Exactly. Anan looked visibly upset when she heard that. Even though it seemed they had misunderstood something, at least she was no longer being harassed. Should she thank him? Even though she felt a little resistant inside, she still walked over to thank him. Just now, it really was lucky you were there. before she could finish, she was even more stunned by how different So Duong suddenly looked from moments ago. He was covering his face, laughing smugly to himself. Wow, I was so cool just now. Anon immediately turned away, pretending she hadn't said anything. She thought So Dong hadn't heard her, but he reached over, ruffled her hair, and replied, "Oh, no need to be polite. To serve a princess with all my strength is this knight's greatest honor." At that, Anon finally lost it. "You're way too deep in character." Then she complained tearfully, "Thanks to you, I'm now a flirt and a two-timer. My reputation has been destroyed in an instant. I've never even dated anyone in my whole life." So Duong ruffled her hair again. "Don't care too much about what other people think. Just be yourself." Then he pulled Anon a little closer. "Come on, I'll lend you my chest for a moment." But Anon immediately shoved him away. "You're obviously just trying to take advantage of me. Wow, you're really sly." Right then, Ninmak had already been standing behind them, watching everything. Ang, Stephen, and Mumut, Nyanmak. Then Ninmak walked over. "Ninmak, why are you?" But he only said coldly, "Come here." In front of the tall dorm building, loud laughter could already be heard from outside. One of the girls in the room was laughing so hard she was clutching her stomach. "So you were really threatened?" The girls were sitting together, listening to Anon's story. "Gao smiled. I never thought you'd run into such a melodramatic manga scenario too." "Well, I guess it's an experience." That only made Anon even more furious. She went over to Sohan, buried herself in her arms, and cried. "Sohan, they're all making fun of me." Sohan gently comforted her. "It's okay. Didn't Senior So Duong help scare them off? They won't dare bully you again after this." I asked, "So what happened after that?" She leaned in close to Anon, her expression growing less and less humane. "What exactly did you two secretly do? Confess honestly." Anon answered a little shyly. "Nothing happened. You're overthinking it." Then Anon began recounting what happened next. In the student dining area, the place was crowded and filled with lively chatter. Anon sat at a table with Nanmak. Holding her chopsticks over the meal in front of her, she said, "You really didn't have to treat me to lunch. It feels kind of strange." But Nanmak only stared off into the distance, his eyes full of thoughts. It turned out he was thinking about the moment when So Duong had called on his girlfriend, and his face darkened. Anon waved a hand in front of him and called out, "Nyanma." Only then did he snap out of it and turn back. "Don't be polite. Think of it as me apologizing." Hearing that, Anon looked surprised. "Apologizing?" Nanmak continued, "I saw everything that happened just now. I caused you trouble. Sorry." Anon then bit lightly on her chopsticks as she thought back to what had happened. "The 3 senior girls who tried to bully me?" She waved her hand cheerfully. "Don't worry. I won't take such a small thing to heart. Pen ang hestita. Besides, if anyone should apologize, it should actually be me. I went to your classroom to find you without your permission and caused the people who like you to misunderstand our relationship. You must be really troubled by that." At that, Nanmak's gaze dimmed slightly, and a sudden silence settled between them. Right then, Anon suddenly had an idea and blurted out, "How about I go explain it to them tomorrow?" Nanmak looked confused. "How are you going to explain it?" Anon answered, "I'll say that you suddenly hung up, and I was worried about you, so that's why I." It sounded even worse, so Nanmak only said resignedly, "No need to explain. From now on, let's stop the phone dubbing." Anon looked regretful and asked, "Huh? Why?" It was obviously really fun, but Nanmak still maintained his cold attitude. So Anon thought for a moment and said unwillingly, "Fine then." But then she suddenly thought of something. "If we can't do it over the phone, then you'll just have to say it directly to me in person." The thought of Nanmak sitting in front of her and speaking or singing for her made Anon excited again. Actually, that doesn't sound bad either. While Nanmak was still hesitating, Anon had already stood up and decided, "All right, it's settled then." Later, back at the dormitory, "We're here. Thanks for walking me back. You should go now." Anon said goodbye to Nanmak, but he hesitated a lot about what So Duong had said, calling her his girlfriend. Seeing Anon looking at him expectantly, Nanmak turned away. "It's nothing. I'm leaving." Anon stood there watching his retreating figure and thought, "It feels like Lord Xiaoba wanted to say something to me." After returning to the room, she sat with her friends and discussed it again. Anon said, "That's all. I just skipped over the dubbing part." Hearing that, Ka Ai folded her arms and stared in disbelief. "What? You only ate one meal together and nothing else happened? You actually let such a perfect confession opportunity go to waste. Another girl said, when it's time to make a move, that doesn't seem to be your style. Weren't you bold enough the first time you met Mac? You can't keep worrying about everything like this. Webtoon. What do you mean confession? It's not like I'm pursuing him. Her classmate looked surprised. Not pursuing him? Don't you like him? Then why aren't you chasing him? Anon felt a little flustered and thought, how am I supposed to explain this? I can't exactly tell them I only got close to Mac because I wanted him to dub lines for me. If they find out about me treating his voice like a boyfriend, Mac will kill me. She stammered, that isn't the point. Then she quickly changed the subject. Oh, right. What do you think Mac was trying to say to me? AI replied, you want to know? Then go ask him yourself. But Anon cried miserably. I already asked, but he wouldn't say. AI folded her arms, looked into the distance, and smiled. If you want someone to talk, isn't that simple? Right now, there's a perfect chance. 3 days later, at a restaurant, everyone was eating, drinking, and chatting happily. The hot pot dishes on the table looked delicious. Fi and Fi each held a glass in their hands as they stared straight ahead. They were looking at Lam On and Nan Mac sitting opposite them. The atmosphere suddenly turned awkwardly silent. In this situation, Lam On couldn't help feeling confused. Fi had said they would use her birthday to trick words out of Nan Mac, and Nan Mac had indeed come. But why did the atmosphere feel so strange? Right then, Nan Mac suddenly stood up and said, I'm going to the restroom for a moment. Lam On and the others quickly nodded. After that, they all watched him leave intently. Lam On asked curiously, has he gone far enough? Fifi imeditang ziplit. Far enough. The very next second, they all huddled together. Lam On said worriedly, what happened to the natural, cheerful, harmonious atmosphere you promised? This is nothing like the scene we imagined. What do we do now? Hearing that, Fi immediately reassured her, calm down, don't panic. In a minute, Fi and I will attack in turns and get him so drunk he's half asleep. Once he's muddle-headed and barely conscious, you'll be able to coax the truth out of him all you want. At that point, he'll be like a puppet under your control. Whatever you ask, he'll answer. Fi, sitting beside her, grinned wickedly and chimed in. And if you want to do anything else, then won't he just be meat on the chopping block, ready for you to do as you please? As soon as she said that, they burst into excited laughter. Lam On immediately shook her head in protest. What do you mean, do as I please? You guys. No, absolutely not. But as soon as she finished speaking, her face turned red with embarrassment. That made Fi and Fi look at her with disdain. Such a coward. You're too soft to amount to anything. Just then, Lam On suddenly asked, but what if he can really hold his liquor? Fifi smike on feed in. Don't worry about that. One look at Nan Mac, and you can tell he's the type of good boy who doesn't know how to drink. Fi immediately added, exactly. And there's this too. In a bit, we'll use this to pour him drinks. They discussed their plan in great detail, determined to succeed or die trying. With the three of them making such a noisy fuss, the people around them couldn't help but turn and look curiously in their direction. 10 minutes later, with a mug of beer in hand, a cheerful voice rang out. Drink some more. Lam On, already completely drunk, swayed as she emptied her glass. Full of excitement, she shouted, cheers. This left Fi and Fi utterly helpless. Anon's one Kapanshi's drunk skill is actually real. I'm more concerned with why. We only found out now. With the plan now ruined, they could only helplessly think. Looks like we can only use her trump card. Right then, Lam On suddenly called out, Lord Tong Zhong. She muttered something incoherent, leaving Nan Mac utterly confused. The next second, he took her hand and reminded her, stop drinking. In response, Lam On's eyes suddenly sparkled, and Nan Mac seemed to sense a vague bad premonition. In the very next second, Lam On suddenly leaned toward him, then moved right up close to his face and whispered, Lord Tong Zhong, you're so handsome. I really like your voice. In that situation, Nan Mac could only answer helplessly, Lam On you. Then he quickly pushed her away and said, let go. Lam Ang my barali in Ansua no unless. At that, she suddenly raised her hand. Then, lifting Nan Mac's chin, she smiled and said, unless Lord Tong Zhong reads me the lines I like. Otherwise, I won't let go. Nan Mac froze on the spot at what she had just done. Fi and the others were so shocked their mouths fell open. While taking out her phone to snap a picture of the moment, Fi said, this is worlds apart from the original plan, but the way things are developing is even more interesting now. standing beside her. Tu-Fi replied with delight, the child can be taught. Meanwhile, Ninmak was still trying to speak. Let go first, then talk. Halva, lam ang imitang obethet? No, you talk first, then I'll let go. As soon as she finished, her attention suddenly shifted to Nanmak's face. She said suspiciously, Lord Tongjung, why is your face so red? It feels soft when I touch it too, and kind of springy. I want to take a bite. Sang tat lamang ang was about those also meetings to Nyanmak huinuna ho lamang ang gamdao. Meanwhile, Lamanon stared at him with an eager, delighted expression. Nanmak's face instantly went pale, while Lamanon puckered her lips and moved closer to him. In the next second, she kissed Ninmak while thinking to herself, gummy candy tastes really good. Lam ang aksan lep Nyanmak utali so. He immediately frowned and covered his mouth, while Lamanon, on the other hand, looked completely satisfied. Outside the restaurant, Lamanon was still clinging tightly to Nanmak and refusing to let go. In that situation, Fi said helplessly, so many people are staring. Think of something. At this rate, she definitely won't let go. Nyanmak glangset at lam anyang. Then couldn't help sighing. Just then, some girls behind them suddenly noticed the two of them and said in surprise, look over there. That's so bold. Nanmak was holding Lamanon in his arms, letting her sleep peacefully. But the more he looked at her, the more uneasy he felt, and he called out, Lamanon. She was still fast asleep, oblivious to everything, and only murmured vaguely, Lord. Hearing that, Nanmak couldn't help feeling puzzled. Lam ang suden li gonfet. I like you. The moment he heard that, Nanmak's face flushed slightly. He thought, is she talking to me? But in the very next second, he forced himself to calm down and asked, what are you talking about? Lamanon continued hazily, I like you from the first time I met you. It was love at first sight. The more he heard, the more embarrassed Ninmak became, and he said, stop talking. But as soon as he said it, he couldn't help thinking, why do these words sound so familiar? Could it be? In the next instant, the image of an overbearing CO pinning his lover against a wall appeared in his mind. I fell in love with you at first sight. Everything about you, from top to bottom, inside and out, is exactly my type, exactly what I like, especially down there. The moment he thought of that, Ninmak panicked inwardly. Oh no, I'm done for. Meanwhile, Lamanon was still saying happily, especially down there. Ninmak quickly reached out. As he covered Lamanon's mouth, he said, enough, stop talking. He couldn't help telling himself, so it really is like that. However, it seemed everyone had heard what she said, leaving them all utterly stunned. Ninmak hurriedly explained, no, that's not it, Aishi. It's not what everyone thinks. Tu-Fi smiled with interest and replied, explaining means covering up, and covering up means it's true. In this situation, Ninmak could only give a helpless, awkward smile. Then he said, let's find somewhere to sit and rest. At this moment, Lamanon was nestled in Tu-Fi's arms beneath a small tree when a hand suddenly tugged at Nanmak's shirt. It was Fi. She said softly, come here for a moment. Anon has really been hung up on what you wanted to say to her that day, since you kept hesitating. So before she could finish, Fi gave a helpless, forced smile and thought, I never expected that not only would she fail to say anything, she'd also completely embarrass herself in front of him like this. Nanmak probably doesn't have a good impression of her at all now. Paul ang. Then she quickly apologized. I hope you won't take what happened today to heart. Anon just wanted to understand you better. She didn't mean any harm. She accidentally got drunk, and even crossing the line with you was just an accident. I'm apologizing on her behalf. After hearing those words, Nanmak fell silent for a long while. The next day, in the dormitory, the moment Lamanon turned on her phone, her face went pale and she cried out in horror, what did I do? Seeing her trembling non-stop over what she had done the night before, Fi immediately tried to comfort her. Calm down. Meanwhile, countless memories suddenly flooded back into Lamanon's mind. She could only collapse onto the bed and think in despair, farewell, beautiful world. It's over. Died at 19. Music from her phone kept playing. Listening to Shout 2 by Jun Yuan, adapted from the original BL audio drama Love You Without Reason, produced by Who Studio. For more exciting content, check out the app. As she listened, Lamanon spoke in a tearful voice. When is great God, Xiao Ba, ever going to release a new work? I can only survive off his old ones. I've already rewatched this one 3 times this month. I'm not going to make it at this rate. She couldn't help thinking gloomily, I want to hear great God Xiao Ba's voice right now. Is he free? As soon as the thought crossed her mind, Lam On immediately sent a message. She happily told herself sent, but after reading the reply Max sent her, Lam On sighed. As expected of great God Xiaoba. Last time you said you were writing your thesis. This time you say you're practicing piano. Every time, you come up with some excuse to turn me down. Am I really that annoying? But in the very next second, she pulled herself together again. No, I have to think of something. I've got it. As soon as she said that, Lam On quickly started typing. On the phone screen, a caption appeared clearly. I have a secret about the campus heartthrob. Not sure whether I should say it or not. After finishing it, Lam On said, all done. A slender hand touched the piano. At that moment, Mac was standing beside it, looking at his phone. As he read the message, he thought to himself, she's not calling nonstop this time. Did she really give up that easily? In the next second, Mac saw something else. The post Lam On had just uploaded, which left him utterly shocked. In the next instant, he hurriedly messaged her in a panic. Delete that post immediately. I agree to it all. At the park, several strange sounds rang out, making the two young women nearby nervous and uneasy. Over there. And no, not there. In the next second, they blushed with embarrassment and quickly turned around and ran off. Meanwhile, Mac's voice continued amid his embarrassment. Translator, don't. Translator, be gentler. At that moment, Mac was sitting with his back to Lam On, thinking to himself, these really are the kind of sounds that make people's minds run wild. At the same time, Lam On was also baffled, wondering, but why am I being made to sit with my back to him? I really want to see Great God Xiaoba's face while he's dubbing. Then she quickly asked, Great God Xiaoba, can I turn around and look at you? Mac's face turned red, and he immediately replied, no. Lam On was extremely confused. Why not? Mac still insisted on refusing. No means no. As soon as he said that, he thought helplessly, when I'm recording in the studio with other people around, I feel completely normal. So why is it different in front of Lam On? Whatever, there's only the last part left. Then Mac quickly continued recording. I like you too, even if something happens. While he was concentrating on his work, Lam On thought with great interest. The more he won't let me see, the more I want to. I'll just take a quick look. Mac's voice continued to ring out. I still won't leave your side. Lam On slowly reached her hand behind her, then fully turned around to look. She couldn't help staring blankly at what she saw. Mac was completely immersed in his character. For your sake, I don't care about the rumors at all. The more she listened, the more stunned Lam On became. Great God Xiaoba. At that moment, Mac suddenly looked toward her. Lam On, meanwhile, remained frozen to the spot in a daze. The atmosphere between the two of them suddenly turned frighteningly tense. Panik inwali. I've been caught. Then she quickly explained, I didn't see anything. By then, Mac was blushing furiously as he shouted, Outside, the breeze gently stirred the branches and leaves. Side sopti. Wow. Great God Xiaoba. You don't need to feel embarrassed. The moment he heard that, Mac immediately turned to look at her. Lam On started talking nonsense with an extremely serious expression. As a professional voice actor, putting emotion into the character while dubbing is perfectly normal, right? Actually, that expression that makes people feel sinful thoughts. It's not Great God Xiaoba's expression. It's the character's. Mac immediately turned and walked away, replying, I almost believed your nonsense. Lam On still kept adding a few more words. Besides, Great God Xiaoba looks really charming when he's serious. I even recorded all those wonderful lines. I'll treasure them carefully. Under those circumstances, as Mac walked away, his face was as red as a tomato. However, before he had gone very far, he immediately turned back. Mac hurriedly snatched Lam On's phone and said, What recording? How do I delete it? Lam On ran toward him and cried, Great God Xiaoba, don't delete it. Hurry and get it back to me. But Mac had already gotten into her phone and deleted the recording file. The moment he finished, Mac immediately handed the phone back to her. Lam On could only think tearfully, not having a password is the biggest mistake of my life. Audio from a phone kept playing. Wanli, I love you. From now on, let me protect you. We'll be happy together forever. As soon as the line ended, the phone went silent. Mac said coldly, that's all. But as soon as he said it, he couldn't help thinking to himself, I actually dubbed for her all afternoon. Meanwhile, Lam On's eyes brimmed with tears as she thought in deep emotion. Perfect. Seeing her like this, Nanmak was utterly puzzled. Haven't you listened to this one many times already? As she wiped away her tears, Lam replied. But no matter how many times I listen to it, I still get tortured to pieces by the feelings of the two male leads. At that time, Wanli was calling out happily, Chin Kong. The moment he heard his name, Chin Kong immediately turned around. Wanli smiled brightly and said, "Let's go to the library and study together this weekend." Hearing that, Chin Kong blushed a little, but in the next second, he immediately turned his head away and replied coldly, "Forget it. Don't come looking for me anymore." Wanli couldn't help being extremely curious. "What?" As Chin Kong walked away, he answered calmly, "Because I hate you." In Lam On's narration, after news of Wanli confessing to Chin Kong spread throughout the school, Wanli was bullied by his classmates, but Chin Kong stood by with folded arms and did nothing to help him. At that time, all the classmates crowded around Wanli and mocked him. "You're not dead yet, you sissy. Why not just die already? Maybe then we'd even light incense for you." Seeing Wanli being bullied, Chin Kong only passed by coldly. In that situation, Wanli said softly with tearful eyes, "Help me." Chin Kong naturally heard those words, yet he still chose to leave. Lam On continued. But luckily, Chin Kong eventually realized his own feelings, and he even overcame all his psychological barriers and took the initiative to confess to Wanli. If in the end he still couldn't open his heart, then Wanli really would never have been able to step out of the darkness. Nanmak listened intently, then lowered his eyes and thought, open his heart? If back then, in his memory, he was standing face to face with Tringwen in a secluded corner. Looking shy, Tringwen confessed, "Nanmak, I like you." The moment he heard that, Nanmak replied at once, "Tringwen, I've always thought of you as my best friend, but now, you really disgust me." The more Nanmak thought back on it, the more he blamed himself. "I shouldn't have said something so hurtful." Those words naturally wounded Tringwen deeply. He clenched his palm tightly without saying a word. A few days later, rumors spread everywhere. I heard Tringwen took sleeping pills and tried to kill himself at home. When Nanmak heard that, he said, but he was saved, right? What exactly happened for him to be unable to think straight like that?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he suddenly realized something, then fell completely silent. Thinking of Tringwen, Nanmak told himself, maybe he already. At that moment, he was suddenly pulled out of his thoughts by a voice calling, "Great God Xiao Ba." Sitting in front of him, Lam On asked curiously, "Great God Xiao Ba, what are you thinking about? Why are you spacing out like that?" Nanmak remained silent and gave no answer. "Dis met lam ein actually what it." In the next second, Nanmak suddenly asked, if Chin Kong's feelings toward Wanli weren't love, would he still have a chance to reconcile with Wanli? The question left Lam On frozen for a long while. Then she could only give an awkward smile and reply, "Well, the script wouldn't allow that to happen. After all, they're the main characters, so they'll definitely end up together. But in real life, it doesn't really matter what exactly you feel for the other person. As long as you can say it honestly, maybe there won't be so many misunderstandings and regrets." After hearing that answer, Nanmak fell silent again. Lam On looked at him closely, then asked, "Great God Xiao Ba, why did you suddenly ask that?" Nanmak immediately looked away, then replied coldly, "It's nothing." The breeze lightly stirred the thin curtains in the classroom. Nanmak pondered for a long while, then suddenly suggested, "During summer vacation, do you want to come to the drama troupe and listen to an audio drama recording?" Hearing that, Lam On was utterly stunned. Meanwhile, Nanmak calmly continued, "The new project I recently accepted will start recording during summer break. Everyone in the troupe knows me, so they might let you come and listen." Lam On abruptly jumped to her feet and replied excitedly, Really? Which one is it? Which one is it? Is there an original novel? When do you start joining the production?" Wow, Great God Xiao Ba is finally taking on a new work. I've been suffering while waiting for this. Seeing her like this, Nanmak immediately reminded her, "You don't have to be so dramatic." Lam On quickly answered, "You don't understand the feeling of us fans running on empty for more than half a year." Then she excitedly kept talking, "What do I do? I'm really looking forward to summer vacation. What kind of new work will Great God Xiao Ba's be? It's seriously so exciting. Hey, Great God Xiao Ba, give me a little spoiler." Seeing how interested Lam On was, Nanmak could only remind her helplessly, "Keep your voice down." In Lam On's thoughts, one day, I'll convey these feelings to his heart. In the manga club room, a draft was being sketched. Lam Ein sang sopti while focusing on her drawing. At that moment, someone suddenly approached and said, "Well, not bad. The moment she heard that voice, Lamon jumped in fright and shouted. She couldn't help commenting, "You use the same trick every time. You're really childish. And why is Senior here?" Standing beside her. So Duong immediately replied, "My dearest Junior Anon is here, so how could I possibly be absent?" As soon as he said that, a voice suddenly called from afar, "Senior So Duong, could you come here for a moment?" Looking at So Duong, Lam thought to herself, "This is Senior So Duong from the Manga Club." Meanwhile, So Duong was being surrounded by many female students. "Senior So Duong, there's something I don't understand. Could you help me take a look?" Me too. Senior So Duong. Holding a sketch in his hand, So Duong replied, "Let me see. You need to make your strokes a little firmer here." As soon as they heard that, the girl smiled and replied, "Thank you, Senior." Meanwhile, Lam remained lost in her thoughts. He's a good person, but for some reason he's always so over the top, and I don't know why he always pays special attention to me. It really gives people a headache. So Duong said gracefully, "If there's anything you don't understand, feel free to come to me anytime. It's my honor to guide such lovely princesses in drawing." He kept chatting nonstop with the girls surrounding him. That left Lamon unable to do nothing but smile awkwardly. In the next second, So Duong quickly sat down right beside her and said, "Hey Anon, I heard you've been pretty close to that kid Nanmak lately. Are you two seeing each other?" What? Of course not. Why are you asking that? So Duong suddenly raised a hand, then brushed back his hair and said with a smile, "Of course it's because." Because what? Striking a gentlemanly pose, So Duong replied, "Because I like you." Before he could even finish speaking, Lamon immediately covered his mouth and reminded him, "Thank you, but sorry, I have to decline your kindness." Everyone looked on. Sure enough, it was happening again. Seeing Lamon's attitude, So Duong could not help crying out, "Junior Anon, you're going too far." However, the very next second, his expression turned calm again as he said, "But if you two aren't involved with each other, that means I still have a chance, right?" Lamon's face instantly turned red as she replied, "That has nothing to do with you." As they walked along the road, she turned to So Duong and said, "I already told you there was no need to walk me home. Sorry for making you go out of your way." So Duong cheerfully replied, "Escorting the princess safely back to her castle is a duty a knight cannot shirk. Girls must protect themselves well when they're outside. Even at school, you can't let a guard down." The moment Lamon heard that, she immediately shoved So Duong farther away and said, "If anyone needs to be guarded against, it's seniors like you." Meanwhile, So Duong only stared at her and secretly smiled. Just as they were talking, Nanmak suddenly appeared from nowhere. Quickly noted him. The moment she saw him, she called out Nanmak. Standing at a distance, Nanmak looked at them intently. Lamon immediately stepped forward to greet him. "Nanmak, where are you going?" Nanmak replied coldly, "The piano room." Hearing that, Lamon happily said, "I guessed right." Meanwhile, So Duong watched from afar and thought, utterly puzzled. Since when had those two become so close? At that moment, Nanmak suddenly turned towards So Duong. So Duong stared right back at him. The next second, Nanmak said to Lamon, "I'll go on ahead." She quickly agreed. But before he had gone far, Nanmak was stopped. Wait, the one who called out was none other than So Duong. This left Nanmak extremely puzzled. Meanwhile, So Duong's expression turned serious. In this situation, Lamon called out in confusion, "Senior?" So Duong thought coldly. He acts so cold toward Anon. What's with this brat pretending to be aloof? He's really irritating. At that moment, Nanmak suddenly spoke. "May I ask what you want?" So Duong immediately got straight to the point. "Nanmak, zozulai ainang." The moment she heard that, Lamon jumped in shock and cried out, "Senior, WH, what are you saying?" So Duong said nothing, only let out a cold snort and thought, if he likes her, then within 3 seconds of me asking, he'd already have his answer. As expected, the next second, Nanmak looked away and replied, "I think that probably has nothing to do with you." So Duong immediately warned him seriously, "It has a lot to do with me." Nanmak, a girl's heart isn't easy to grasp. If you don't have the resolve to fight me and win, you could lose her at any moment. The more Nanmak listened, the more confused and awkward he felt. "I don't understand what you're talking about." So Duong immediately stepped closer and said seriously, "What I mean is you should act a little more dangerously, unless you don't care." After saying that, So Duong thought to himself, accept the challenge or give up. Make your choice. Meanwhile, Nanmak stayed silent. At that moment, Lam suddenly stepped forward. She directly punched So Duong in the face and shouted, "Senior, that's enough. Don't say weird things like that to Nanmak." After taking her punch, So Duong groaned in pain. "Ow, damn it. I was just getting into the mood." Lam replied flatly, "Into the mood, my foot." The next second, Lam bowed to Nanmak with So Duong and apologized. "Sorry. Please just forget the nonsense," Senior said. Seeing the way the two of them were acting, Nanmak awkwardly glanced away and replied, "Forget it." At that moment, Lam suddenly turned to So Duong and reminded him, "Senior, hurry up," and apologized to Nanmak. So Duong stared at Nanmak from afar, then thought helplessly, "You idiot, can't you tell I'm helping you test the waters? And yet you're angry at me for someone who doesn't even like you. Fine, if I have to apologize, I'll apologize." After thinking that, So Duong coldly said, "Sorry, I was just joking." Nanmak replied stiffly, "It's fine." The next second, So Duong fell into thought again. Still, it seemed Nanmak was surprisingly pure-hearted. Even after being provoked like that, he didn't get angry at all, and instead forgave him right away. Delicate brows, refined features, with a little cuteness hidden beneath his shyness. Pure, kind, handsome, adorable. Could this be Nanmak's true face beneath that cold disguise? After thinking it over for a while, So Duong could only cry helplessly inwardly, "Damn it, I lost." Seeing his utterly baffled expression, Nanmak and Lam could only stand there in confusion. Nanmak sudelitun toluk at lam anyang. Then remembered So Duong's earlier question, "Do you like her?" He suddenly smiled to himself. It doesn't count as liking her, but since getting to know her, I haven't disliked her either. At that moment, Lam was finally completely fed up. She grabbed So Duong and shook him hard as she said, "Senior, stop acting out your inner drama and snap out of it." Meanwhile, Nanmak coldly walked over and said, "I still have something to do, so I'll leave first." Seeing that, Lam let go of So Duong, then looked at Nanmak gently and said, "I'm really sorry. I hope you won't take it to heart." Nanmak did not reply. He then turned and left. But before he had gone far, Lam called after him, "Oh, right, Nanmak. Final exams are coming up, so I won't bother you during this time. Let's meet again with the drama troupe during summer break." Hearing that, Nanmak seemed a little surprised, but he still said nothing. Just like that, he left coldly. Lam turned back to look at So Duong behind her. He was still deep in thought, leaving her completely speechless and confused. "Senior, I really have to hand it to you." At school, Nanmak was standing outside the door, staring intently at his phone. On the screen was his chat with Lam After slipping his phone back into his pocket, Nanmak thought to himself, "Why did I impulsively invite her back then?" Going back to that moment, Lam had been staring at Nanmak intently, and the atmosphere between them had suddenly fallen into an awkward silence. The more Nanmak thought about it, the more heavily he sighed. Clearly, even dubbing in front of her felt unnatural. At that moment, a voice suddenly rang out, "Nanmak." Nanmak quickly glanced over. It was La Manhwa. Looking lovely, she was running toward him. As soon as she came close, Lam said, "Sorry, I was afraid I'd be late, so I took a taxi, but we got stuck in traffic." Nanmak replied, "It's fine. Let's go in." Hearing that, Lam smiled brightly and agreed. As soon as they entered, she exclaimed in admiration, "It's huge." She looked all around, taking in everything, leaving Nanmak behind her utterly helpless. After looking around for a while, Lam thought with satisfaction, "So this is where great god Xiaoba works." Wow, her eyes sparkled as she looked at everything. At that moment, inside the recording room, Tin Tien said anxiously, "The director said he wants to see the character Tong Dong portrayed with depth. What should I do?" Hearing that question, Hua Dang, who was scrolling through his phone, asked back, "Want to know?" Tin Tien replied obediently like a little puppy. Hua Dang calmly turned to him and said, "Beg me." That made Tin Tien's face darken, and he could only force a smile before angrily thinking, "If you want me to beg, I have to beg? What about my dignity?" Yet the very next second, Tin Tien immediately changed his attitude and said in an adorable voice, "Please." Then he could not help saying to himself, "What is dignity anyway? Can it be eaten?" However, after hearing Tin Tien's plea, Hua Dang replied coldly, "No idea." That completely infuriated Tin Tien. "You bastard, you played me. I'll show you what I can do." Just then, he suddenly noticed someone coming in from outside. "Xiaoba is here." It was Nanmak and the others. As soon as he walked in, he greeted them, "Good morning." Long time no see. Hua Dang immediately replied, long time no see. The next second, he noticed Lam On and looked puzzled. Huh, this is the first time I've seen you bring a girl to the studio. Your girlfriend? Lam On immediately smiled and explained, no, please don't misunderstand. Me nim es Lam Anyang. I'm Great God Xiao Baz Jr., and also his most loyal fan. Hearing that, Tin Tien stood up and introduced himself. So that's how it is. I'm Ting Tien, Nyan Max Long Tim Kao Kai. Hua Dang also cut in, I'm this kid's manager. My name is Hua Dang. Please take care of me in the future. Tin Tien immediately pouted and reminded her, this guy isn't important, so please ignore him. While Lam On was chatting with them smilingly, a voice suddenly came from outside. Xiao Ba is here. Good, then you all go in and get ready. Recording is about to start. Seeing that, Lam On immediately said, then let's get to work. Nan Mac and the others focused on their work. Outside the recording room, Lam On kept staring at him without looking away. This made Nan Mac feel uneasy, and he thought to himself, sure enough, whenever she looks at me, I don't know why, but I just feel unnatural. At that moment, the director spoke up. All right, scene 1, take 1, ready, start. The next second, Tin Tien began recording. That Handong guy, every time he goes out, he drinks himself senseless. Because of that, Tong Dong always had to go to the bar to look for him. Tong Dong thought anxiously, damn it, where exactly is he? Seeing him constantly looking around, Lidat took notice. The next second, he walked over and politely asked, excuse me, do you need help? Are you looking for someone or looking for a place? Tong Dong was a little startled and immediately replied cautiously, in no need, thank you. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned and left at once. This left Lidat extremely confused. The next second, surprise suddenly appeared on his face. Tong Dong was now running straight toward a drunken man. The two of them got closer and closer, causing Lidat behind them to hurriedly shout a warning. Someone's there, be careful. At that moment, the director suddenly called out, cut, stop, Xiao Ba. The shout sounded a little unnatural. Let's do it again. Hearing that, Nan Mac nodded, then glanced toward Lam On in the distance. Hua Dang seemed to sense it too and immediately turned to look at Lam On, who was watching Nan Mac intently with eyes full of admiration. At that moment, Nan Mac could not help saying to himself, relax, just treat her like air. The next second, he took a deep breath. The director's voice rang out again. Scene 3, take 2, start. Nan Mac directly shouted, someone's there, be careful. But in the very next second, he froze in place and thought in a panic. My voice cracked. This immediately plunged the entire studio into silence. Nan Mac blushed red with embarrassment. Tin Tien and the others were utterly stunned. Even Lam On and the others were no exception. The next second, Tin Tien suddenly burst into laughter and said delightedly, Xiao Ba, I never thought your voice would crack. Lam On also tried hard to hold back her laughter, but she still said happily, I know this is really disrespectful to Great God Xiao Ba, but I really can't hold it in anymore. Because of their reactions, Nan Mac's face turned even redder. Hua Dang watched him carefully, then said, how about taking a short break first? Have a glass of water. It would also give Nan Mac some space to relax. The moment Lam On heard that, she froze slightly, then thought worriedly and uncertainly. Could it be that my being here affected Nan Mac's performance? Meanwhile, inside the recording room, Tin Tien was still teasing Nan Mac. I can't believe your voice cracked. As he went to get some water, Hua Dang said, it's rare for Nan Mac to get this nervous. And a voice crack like that is the first time I've ever seen it. I think it's probably because you were there. Hearing that, Lam On looked utterly shocked and worried. Did I really affect him? As soon as she said that, she inwardly wailed helplessly, I've let Great God Xiao Ba down. Seeing her expression, Hua Dang immediately comforted her. Why do you look so disappointed? It's perfectly normal to get nervous in front of someone you care about. That made Lam On even more astonished, and she immediately repeated, someone he cares about? She could not help thinking deeply. Was Nan Mac so nervous because he cared about her, to the point that he made a mistake? While she was still lost in thought, Hua Dang brought over a bottle of water. As she took it, Lam On said, thank you. Hua Dang replied calmly, no need to be polite. Lam On slowly drank some water. Then as soon as she set it down, she said, oh right, there's something I'm a little curious about. Hearing that, Hua Dang asked in confusion, what is it? Lam On lowered her voice and said, Great God, Tin Tien is still a minor, right? He looks really young. Hua Dang replied calmly. That kid? If you only look at his appearance, it really is easy to misunderstand. In reality, he's actually a few years older than Nanmak. And although he looks small, his ability definitely shouldn't be underestimated. Before Nanmak joined, he had already won a major award in Japan's voice acting industry. Hearing that, Lamon was full of praise. That's amazing. Whether it's not being able to tell his real age or winning awards. Hua Dang merely smiled as he looked at her. After chatting for a while, Lamon stood up and said, I'm going to the restroom for a moment. Hua Dang immediately gave directions. Go out and turn right. Lamon understood right away and went out. She had not been gone long when Tin Tien and the others opened the door and came in. Covered in sweat, he complained, My God, the recording studio is basically a furnace on Earth. I'm about to melt. Air conditioner, air conditioner. I'm coming. Hugging the air conditioner tightly, Tin Tien happily said to himself, Wow, so cool. Hua Dang immediately walked over, pulled him away, and reminded him, Don't stand right in front of the airflow. You'll catch a cold easily. But Tin Tien stubbornly protested, No, I want the air conditioner. At that moment, Nanmak was also feeling terribly hot. He fanned himself with some paper while thinking, so thirsty. The next second, Nanmak suddenly noticed the bottle of water on the table. He picked it up directly. At that moment, Lamon had also finished using the restroom. The moment she stepped through the door, she saw Nanmak holding the bottle of water in his hand, leaving her slightly puzzled. That bottle of water, the one she had left on the table, was now gone. The moment Lamon saw it, she instantly realized what had happened. Could it be? The very next second, she couldn't help telling herself, Nanmak, please don't. Nanmak picked up the bottle and took a drink. His lips lightly touched the opening before he gulped it down. The moment she saw that, Lamon blushed and said awkwardly, You already drank it. She unconsciously touched her own lips, then cautiously thought to herself, Does this count as an indirect kiss? Seeing her standing there blankly right in front of him, Nanmak asked in confusion, What are you doing standing at the door? Lam einen imeditan ziplit. No, it's nothing. After saying that, she couldn't help worrying. Does Nanmak know I already drank from that bottle? Probably not. Otherwise, how could he? But it's just a bottle of water. My little brother drinks from my bottle all the time. It's no big deal, right? But why is my heart beating so fast? It's almost out of control. At that moment, both Hua Dang and Nanmak were staring intently at Lamon. Hua Dang suddenly noticed the water bottle in Nanmak's hand. In the next second, he understood everything and smiled in delight. Even inside the recording room, Nanmak couldn't take his eyes off Lamon. Meanwhile, she sat there blushing, lost in her own thoughts. That left Nanmak utterly puzzled. What's with her? Why does she seem so strange? Meanwhile, Lamon was still thinking, What do? I indirectly kissed Great God Xiao Ba. That scene keeps replaying in my head. I can't stop thinking about it. She tried hard to calm herself down. No. I can't let my thoughts run wild. Go away. The more Nanmak watched her, the more helpless he felt in the face of her strange behavior. She was really acting weird. Night had fallen. After finishing work, Tin Tien stretched comfortably and said, We're finally done. It's only the first day, and he's already pushing us this hard. Evil director. Beat him up. The director cheerfully replied at once. Come on then, you silly baby. Hearing that, Tin Tien burst out laughing and said brightly, Maybe not after all. Just then, someone suddenly grabbed him by the collar and reminded him, Stop talking and let's go. I still have to get home to feed the cat. Tin Tien said helplessly, Let go of me. Who told you not to get a girlfriend? Single dogs don't deserve to have cats. Seeing how Hua Dang and Tin Tien were always bickering, Lamon couldn't help remarking, The two of them really have a good relationship. Nyanmak ganli ziplit ea. I guess so. Outside, the taxi lights shone brightly by the roadside. As he got into the car, Tin Tien waved goodbye to everyone. See you tomorrow. Hua Dang was whispering something to Nanmak, which made him impatient. What are you saying? Hurry up already. Who was the one rushing me just now? The moment Nanmak heard what Hua Dang said, his face instantly reddened. Lamon was extremely surprised by that. After getting into the car, Hua Dang also called out, See you tomorrow. Lam ein wave bak chiffelin. Bye. See you tomorrow. The taxi drove away the next second. Nan Mac turned to Lam On and said, "We should head home too, right?" Lam On smiled and replied, "We're going the same way anyway. We can share a taxi." And so the two of them rode home together. At that moment, the taxi driver suddenly said, "There's a traffic jam near the Yangtze Bridge. I'll go by Central Park first, then take Zijing Road to AI Chin residential area. Is that okay?" Lam ang imeditan answer, "No problem." But as soon as she said it, she fell awkwardly silent again. The atmosphere between them was unbearably awkward. Hua Dang's earlier words suddenly echoed in Nan Mac's mind. That bottle of mineral water had already been drunk from by classmate Lam. He instantly recalled that bottle of water. The more he thought about it, the redder his face became. Meanwhile, Lam On kept glancing at Nan Mac and thinking, sitting in the same car as Great God Xiao Ba. Why am I so nervous? This isn't like me at all. Maybe I should say something? The thought had barely crossed her mind before she quickly spoke up. At the same time, Nan Mac also said, "Lam ang." That made them both stare at each other in surprise. Nan Mac straightened his face and said, "You go first." Lam On scratched her head and smiled, then replied, "It's nothing much. I'm just really happy." Being able to hear Great God Xiao Ba and Great God Tin Tin record live at the same time really feels like a dream. Thank you for inviting me. Hearing that, Nan Mac froze for a moment. Lam On asked curiously, "What were you going to say just now?" Nan Mac immediately turned his head away in embarrassment. In nothing. Dawn began to break. Over the next few days, Nan Mac gradually got used to Lam On's presence and returned to normal. Even under her burning gaze from beginning to end, he no longer felt awkward. Everything went smoothly. After finishing work, Tin Tien called out happily, "Recording's done. Congratulations, you've finally gotten back your one-take king status." When she heard that, Lam On, who was standing off to the side, became curious. "One-take king?" Tin Tien immediately explained, "It means no matter what he's recording, he can nail it in one take. That's really impressive." Lam I not that in understand. So that's what it means. Tin Tien went on quickly, "But I don't know what's been going on these past few days. I keep making the director dissatisfied. So weird. Is it really because classmate Lam is here? So you got nervous?" Nan Mac quickly replied, "No. It's just because my studies have been stressful, so I neglected practice." The more Lam On listened, the more curious she became. Neglected practice? But at school you often. Before she could finish, Nan Mac, startled and guilty, cut her off at once. "Often told you I was practicing? Actually, I was lying to you." As soon as he finished speaking, he looked at Lam On with a clear warning in his eyes. "Don't say anything unnecessary." Meanwhile, Tin Tien said excitedly, "What are you two doing? Flirting right in front of two single dogs? That's too much." Seeing him say that, Hua Dang, who was standing nearby, quickly interrupted, "Please don't include me." "Thank you." Tin Tien, however, ignored him and kept pouting as he teased, "Why not? I want to include you. You old man, single dog, this old already, and still no girlfriend. The more you don't want me to say it, the more I'll say it. Single dog. Oh my, don't tell me you have some special preference? Maybe you like men or something." The moment Tin Tien finished speaking, Hua Dang suddenly leaned in close and said in a suggestive tone, "That's right. I like you." Tin Tien was utterly shocked. "Why you? What kind of nonsense is that? Who wants you to like them?" Hua Dang kept smiling calmly as he continued, "What? Am I not allowed to like you? Who I like is my business. You have no right to interfere." The moment he heard that, Tin Tien's face turned red. Then he stammered, "You really?" But before he could finish, Hua Dang immediately stepped back and asked, "Don't tell me you took it seriously?" Tin Tien was instantly infuriated by that and shot back, "Who took it seriously? Who would like an old man like you? Narcissism has its limits, you know?" From straight boy Nan Mac's point of view, he couldn't help being confused by the scene in front of him. Why are they suddenly arguing again? Meanwhile, from Fujoshi Lam On's point of view, she thought blankly to herself, what is this sudden boys' love plot twist? Just then, Nan Mac abruptly cut into their quarrel. Since we finished work early for once today, how about we all go eat together? My treat." Hearing that, Hua Dang and Tin Tien both turned to look at him. Then Hua Dang smiled happily and said, "Sure, then I won't be polite." Nan Mac also smiled and turned to Tin Tien. "Let's go." Tin Tien was still annoyed about Hua Dang's teasing just now. Outside, the streets were crowded and bustling. Once they sat down at the table, Tin Tien said excitedly, "It's been so long since I last drank. Today I have to drink my fill." Seeing how he looked, Lamon unhappily thought to herself, "Great God, Tin Tien really doesn't hold grudges." At that moment, Tin Tien suddenly asked, "All right, classmate Lam, can you drink?" "La mein ein Sieblit quickly, Zetz not problem." As he handed her a drink, Tin Tien gently said, "It's not good for girls to drink cold things. This one's room temperature, so have this." Lam took the cup from him and smiled as she replied, "Thank you." However, before she could take it, a hand suddenly reached over and stopped her, leaving Lam startled. "Huh? Nyan Ma?" Nan Mac gently reminded her, "You're not allowed to drink alcohol." Hearing that, Lam became very curious. Why? Nan Mac immediately remembered the last time Lam had gotten drunk and kept babbling nonsense. The more he recalled it, the more certain he became. Last time, she almost exposed her identity after drinking. "I absolutely can't let her drink again this time." Thinking that, Nan Mac said, "I said no, so no." Lam ein obedini litstenen imeditanan sur mama. That made Nan Mac let out a sigh of relief. Lam ein sudenli galito si. She stared at the hand Nan Mac was holding, then called softly, "Great God Xiaoba." Lam was blushing so hard she didn't dare meet his eyes. Only then did Nan Mac realize what was wrong, and he quickly pulled his hand back. "Sorry. Lam ein Ziblit." "It's okay." Just like that, the atmosphere between the two of them became awkward and cautious. Seeing Nan Mac like this, Tin Tien became a little curious. "What's with Xiaoba? It's my first time seeing him so serious. It's just drinking after all. But if Xiaoba says no, then I guess there's no helping it. I'll drink a toast first." As soon as he finished speaking, Tin Tien lifted his glass. But before he could take a sip, the glass of wine was taken away. In its place was a sweet glass of orange juice. The moment he saw that, Tin Tien shouted angrily, "What are you doing?" Hua Dang answered calmly, "Drinking is bad for your throat." Tin Tien hurriedly reached for his wine glass and said irritably, "I don't need you to worry about me. Give it back." However, Tin Tien still couldn't get the glass back from Hua Dang, so he could only give up. "Forget it. Do whatever you want." Then Tin Tien suddenly suggested, "Let's play a game. It's been a long time since we played together." Lam ein imeditang avet happily. Sound good. Tin Tien explained the rules. Same old rules. Draw the joker, and the winner gets to choose someone to make any sound they want. How about it? Sounds thrilling and fun, right? Lam said excitedly, "That sounds really fun." Seeing that, Tin Tien eagerly asked a few more times. "Right?" Just then, Hua Dang suddenly smiled brightly. Tin Tien immediately turned around to look at him and demanded, "What are you laughing at? Dare to play around?" Hua Dang replied confidently, "If we're playing, we're playing. You think I'd be afraid of you?" The next second, he played 2 aces. "Sorry about that, I win." The moment he saw it, Tin Tien broke out in a cold sweat and trembled as he thought, "Damn it, why is this guy's luck always so good every single time?" After thinking that, he immediately said, "I admit defeat." "Go ahead, what do you want to hear?" Wearing a wicked expression, Hua Dang replied, "How about using an embarrassed tone to say to me, 'Master, please discipline me'?" The moment he heard that, Tin Tien felt a little frightened and thought cautiously, "Here it comes. The demon inside this guy's come out again." In the next second, he cowered and trembled. Then, with an extremely coquettish expression, softly said, "Master, please discipline me." The way he looked left Hua Dang momentarily stunned. The next second, Hua Dang rubbed Tin Tien's head and praised him. "So needy, huh? Fine. When we get back, I'll satisfy you." "Good boy." Sitting to the side, Lam watched the scene before her with great delight. The next second, she declared determinedly, "I'm definitely going to try my best to win the next round." Hearing that, Nan Mac couldn't help thinking to himself, "I won't let you succeed." The second round began. Lam smiled brightly and said, "I won." Under those circumstances, Nan Mac sensed danger at once. His expression darkened, and with a stiff smile, he thought, "I am doomed." The next second, Lam looked at him with shining eyes and said, "Nan Mac, act cute like a kitten." Nan Mac was speechless. Then he asked awkwardly, "Do I really have to? Act cute?" Lam ein ding ten ziplit in unison. Zuzo. They were truly of one mind on this. Seeing that, Nan Mac could only look at them helplessly. His face was flushed with embarrassment. The next second, Nan Mac raised his hands like little cat paws and let out a soft meow. Then he asked shyly, "Is this okay?" The moment Lam saw him like that, she cried out excitedly, "So cute. I am dying." Even Tin Tien couldn't help murmuring, "So cute." That only made Nan Mac's face turn red like a tomato, while Lam On stared at him more and more intently. Later that night, when she got home, lying on the bed, Lam On happily told herself, "A hot soak feels so good. My whole body feels relaxed." Even though going to the recording studio every day is tiring, being able to watch Nan Mac record makes all that effort worth nothing. Not only that, as soon as she thought of that, she suddenly remembered the moment when she and Nan Mac had been face to face. At once, Lam On shyly rolled back and forth on the bed and said, "What am I even thinking?" The next day, Tin Tien and Nan Mac were still hard at work. Tin Tien focused and said, "Let's end it here. Thank you for coming to help me today. From now on, no matter what happens, I'll bravely face it on my own." The next second, Nan Mac called out, "Sutong." Tin Tien smiled gently and said, "Thank you for helping me all this time. Li, I will never forget you. I wish you happiness." Deep in character, Nan Mac let out a sigh and added, "I'm sorry." But before he could finish, the director interrupted, "Cut. Tin Tien, the emotion isn't strong enough. Put a little more of the character's feelings into it." Hearing that, Tin Tien nodded and answered, "Yes, director." He couldn't help thinking helplessly, it's already the 5th time and it's still not working. This is really discouraging. At that moment, a hand suddenly landed on Tin Tien's shoulder. Nan Mac turned toward him and encouraged him, "Don't lose heart. Treat yourself as the character. Believe in yourself. It's okay." Hearing that encouragement, Tin Tien immediately took a deep breath and said, "All right, let's begin." Nan Mac smiled and replied, "Okay." In the story, Li called out regretfully, "Su Tong." Standing in front of him, Su Tong smiled and replied, "Thank you for helping me all this time. Li, I will never forget you. I wish you happiness." Li could only say helplessly, "Saw thee." At that moment, Tadong suddenly stepped closer, then hugged Lai Dat and said sorrowfully, "Let me hold you one last time." The very next second, the director praised them. "Good cut. That was very well done." After that scene, Nan Mac quietly called out, "Tin Tien, it's over." He could not help reminding Tin Tien when he got too immersed in the role. The next second, Tin Tien looked at Nan Mac in a daze. Then his face flushed red, and he hurriedly backed away, replying, "I am sorry." Tin Tien could not help but think helplessly to himself, "I got way too into it. How embarrassing." Meanwhile, Nan Mac said calmly, "It's fine." At that moment, Hua Dang was standing outside, watching them talk intently. There was a trace of sadness on his face, and then he suddenly turned and left. Min Wihin Lam ein Luk Toduin Daolai. That part just now was amazing. Ngan Mak Diplit et Sin Tangs. However, Tin Tien did not pay attention to the praise at all. He only looked around carefully and asked, "Where's Hua Dang?" Lam On replied, "Brother Hua just went out. I guess something came up." As soon as he heard that, Tin Tien thought anxiously, he must have seen that hug just now, right? He wouldn't. Then he quickly said, "I'm going out for some air." Tin Tien hurried out. As he ran, he worried to himself, "Even though I know I'm overthinking this, I still can't stop caring." Did Hua Dang suddenly leave because of that hug? For some reason, at this moment, I really want to see him. Just seeing him would be enough. Hua Dang was smoking in silence, deep in thought. He kept recalling the way Tin Tien had held Nan Mac tightly. The more he thought about it, the more bitterly Hua Dang smiled. When exactly had these feelings started to change? 3 years ago, when Hua Dang had first met Tin Tien, he had coldly refused him. "I'm not good with children, so I'm not suitable for you. You should find another manager." The moment he heard that, Tin angrily slammed the table and said, "Who are you calling a child? Can't you clean your eyes out and look properly? What's with that arrogant attitude? Do you think you're the only excellent manager in the world? The people who want to be my manager could line up all the way from here to France, okay?" Seeing that the two of them were about to start bickering noisily, the director, sitting nearby, could not help stepping in. "Both of you calm down a little." In Hua Dang's thoughts, it had clearly started from the very first time they met. Back then, Tin Tien had said casually and cheerfully, "I want hot pot. Order hot pot." Seeing him like that, Hua Dang smiled and said, "Naive. People who make a living with their voice can't eat hot pot." However, Tin Tien looked at him pleadingly and said, "Come on, let's eat it. It's been so long since I last had hot pot. I'll massage your shoulders. Here, have some water. As Hua Dang recalled the past, he thought to himself, it had been destined from the beginning that we could never get along like an ordinary manager and voice actor. Back then, Tintien had said tiredly, I'm so sleepy. Let me sleep. Hua Dang had immediately tried to persuade him helplessly. Read through tomorrow's dubbing lines once before you sleep. After saying that, Hua Dang could not help thinking, clearly, what I'm worst at is dealing with this kind of childish person who always thinks he's right. At that time, Tin Tien had stubbornly flopped onto the bed and said, I don't want to. I want to sleep. Instead, he had even happily teased Hua Dang. What a weird personality. Every day you wear that cold expression like a block of ice. No wonder you can't find a girlfriend. At that thought, countless images of Tin Tien suddenly surfaced in Hua Dang's mind. He seemed utterly conflicted inside. But why was it that at this moment, every memory of him affected him so much? What exactly was wrong with him? Just then, a voice suddenly sounded from the distance. It was Tin Tien. The moment Hua Dang saw him, he was a little surprised. Tin Tien also called out blankly, Hua Dang. Then he quickly walked over to him. Anan said you came out because you had something to do, so I came to check. Hua Dang stared at Tin Tien without answering. Seeing that, Tin Tien asked awkwardly and worriedly, Are you okay? Hua Dang slowly raised his hand, thinking, if you knew what I was thinking, how would you treat me? Then Hua Dang smiled lightly and said, I'm fine. I just ate something really sour earlier, and it made my stomach a little uncomfortable, so I came out to get some air. Upon hearing that, Tin Tien asked curiously, What did you eat? If you don't feel well, should we go to the hospital and get you checked? Hua Dang said, No need. As soon as he heard that, Tin Tien looked full of concern. Really no need? If you're not feeling well, don't force yourself. Hua Dang suddenly spread his arms and calmly said, Really no need. If I can get a hug, I'll be fine. Seeing that, Tin Tien could only judge helplessly. If he can still joke around, then he really must be fine. That's true. Looking at him, Hua Dang smiled and thought to himself, maybe keeping things as they are for now is the best choice. At that moment, Lam Anan and Nan Mak were standing upstairs watching them. She could not help asking in confusion, what's going on with those two? One after the other, they suddenly ran outside. Maybe I know why. Tin Tien was sitting in the script practice room, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept feeling that Hua Dang was very strange. As he thought back to Hua Dang patting his head earlier, Tin Tien wondered, why'd he do that? I really want to ask him clearly, but how could I possibly ask something like that out loud? Thinking of this, Tin Tien sighed and muttered softly, I'd better stop overthinking it. Hua Dang probably only did that on a whim. Anyway, whatever that guy does always leaves people confused and unable to understand him. Besides, if Hua Dang knew I keep thinking about him, he'd definitely avoid me as far as possible. I really shouldn't bring trouble on myself by being sentimental. Just as he stood up, Lam Anan suddenly froze in the distance. In an instant, the air between them abruptly fell silent. Lam Anan hurriedly ran out of the room in embarrassment. I didn't hear anything at all. In this situation, Tin Tien could only hurriedly call out, Wait! Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the thin curtain. Tin Tien sat on the chair with a dejected face and said, That's basically it. After saying this, he thought helplessly to himself, I'm such an idiot. I kept it hidden for so long, and yet I still... After hearing the whole story, Lam Anan finally understood. So that's how it is. Her heart then filled with all kinds of thoughts. So all this time, Tin Tien has always. As for Brother Hua, he must be suffering too. Tin Tien said dispiritedly, You probably find this hard to accept. The moment she heard that, Lam Anan hurriedly waved her hands and replied with a smile, Absolutely not. Don't worry, I'll keep this secret for you. This moved Tin Tien deeply, and he said in a choked voice, Thank you. Just then, Lam Anan suddenly made a suggestion. If you're not sure how the other person feels, why not test him? This greatly surprised Tin Tien. Test him. Lam Anan smiled and replied, That's right. For example, when the two of you make eye contact, if he immediately looks away and pretends not to notice, that means... During break time, Tin Tien did exactly as Lam Anan had suggested. He stared intently at Hua Dang in the distance, filled with determination as he thought, I don't know if this is real, but I'll just try it. Hua Dang seemed to sense his gaze and immediately turned to look back. Tin Tien, full of anticipation, thought to himself, Our eyes met. He'll look away right away, won't he? However, contrary to what he expected, Hua Dang simply kept looking at him with a gentle smile on his lips. This made Tin Tien so shy that his face flushed red. If he keeps staring at me like that, I won't be able to take it. The moment he thought that, he immediately turned and left. Lam ein kontin ziving at vits. Another example, pretend to accidentally drink something the other person has already drunk. If he doesn't mind at all, then that also means you get it. After finishing his coffee, Hua Dang set the cup down on the table. Tin Tien kept staring at the cup. This is the moment. The next second, he decisively picked up the coffee and drank it, leaving Hua Dang bewildered. Seeing Hua Dang's reaction, Tin Tien could not help finding it puzzling. This reaction is like, but before he could finish the thought, his eyes widened. Then he spat the coffee straight out and shouted, "Is coffee this bitter even meant for human consumption?" Seeing Tin Tien like this, Hua Dang could only think helplessly, I was just about to remind him that it's black coffee with no sugar and no milk. Elsewhere, Tin Tien said sorrowfully and aggrieved. Both tests failed. Looks like I really was just flattering myself. This made Lam On, standing beside him, ache for him too. The next second, she thought to herself, what is going on? Could it be that Brother Hua really doesn't have any feelings for Tin Tien? Or is there a problem with the test methods? Meanwhile, Tin Tien sighed tiredly and said, I should just give up. Hearing that, Lam On was extremely startled. She anxiously thought to herself, what if the methods were wrong and I end up ruining things for the two of them? Then Lam On quickly encouraged Tin Tien, you absolutely must not give up. Anything is possible. However, by this point he had already lost hope and replied sadly, no, there's no possibility between me and him. With a face full of seriousness, Lam On added, try one more time. One last method. Tin Tien, looking nervous and uneasy, sat beside Hua Dang. Lam On's earlier words suddenly surfaced in his mind. The best way to confirm something is to ask directly. First, invite Brother Hua out. While you're chatting pleasantly, casually bring up the question. Not only can this avoid obvious embarrassment, but the chances of getting an honest answer from the other person are also higher. Tin Tien broke out in a cold sweat at the thought, and in the next second he thought dejectedly, if I could ask so easily, I wouldn't be this troubled right now. But Anan isn't wrong. If I keep hesitating like this, I may end up with nothing in the end. Maybe I should be a little braver. No matter what, I should try Anan's method first and see what happens. The next second, Tin Tien softly called out to Hua Dang. Wu Zhang. Hua Dang immediately turned to look at him. Tin Tien then said, the day after tomorrow is our day off. Are you free? If you're not busy, do you want to go see a movie together? I heard there's a movie that's supposed to be really good lately. Hearing this, Hua Dang fell into thought. Even though I really want to go see a movie with you, if I get carried away in the moment and can't control my feelings, then something serious will happen. Thinking of this, Hua Dang could only say helplessly, sorry, I'm busy the day after tomorrow. Seeing that, Tin Tien immediately added, it's okay. I can wait until you're done. However, before he could finish speaking, Hua Dang cut him off. Why don't you ask Mac and on a go? After hearing that, Tin Tien had nothing more to say. He could only turn away, sadly, and say dejectedly, all right then, I'll head out first. The director is probably looking for me. Hua Dang could only reply calmly, Though that was his attitude on the surface, Hua Dang seemed to be suffering deeply inside as he clenched his fist. The next day, a voice came from outside the recording room. All right, I understand. Don't worry about things here. Just rest well and get better. After hanging up the phone, Hua Dang turned to Nan Mac and the others and said, it seems Tin Tien has caught a cold and has a fever. You probably can't come record today. Sorry for delaying everyone's progress. As soon as he heard that, Nan Mac immediately replied, a fever? Is it serious? Let's all go visit Tin Tien. Lam an so avet. Right, let's go see him. She could not help wildly imagining things in her heart. Could it be that Tin Tien was hit so hard by Hua Dang's rejection that he couldn't bear it, and in his heartbreak and grievance he made himself sick? Hua Dang said seriously, no need. If both lead voice actors ask for leave, the director will be furious. I'll pass along your concern for the two of you. Don't worry. Hearing that, Nan Mac could only go along with it. All right, outside at the market, as Hua Dang picked out vegetables, he wondered to himself, why did he suddenly get sick? Just then, he suddenly recalled rejecting Tin Tien's invitation yesterday. Hua Dang grew curious. Could it be because I turned down his invitation to see a movie that he got upset? After all, even though this kid looks carefree and straightforward on the outside, his heart is actually more delicate and fragile than a strand of hair. There was once a time when I didn't greet him in the morning, and he thought I hated him, so he stayed down all day. This time, who knows what kind of grand drama he's imagined again. At Tin Tien's house, Hua-Dang used the manager's spare key to open the door. Then he slowly walked inside. At that moment, Tin Tien was dizzily wandering around the house. The instant he saw Hua-Dang, he jumped in fright and shouted, "Why are you here?" However, just as he finished speaking, his eyes dimmed and blurred, and then he collapsed straight down. Hua-Dang panicked and dropped the bag in his hands. He hurried over and caught Tin Tien, his face full of worry and alarm at Tin Tien's condition. Tin Tien had an ice pack on his head to help cool him down, and he had already fallen asleep on the bed. The next second, Tin Tien hazily woke up. He said tiredly, "My head is so cold. What happened? Who put ice on my forehead?" As soon as he finished speaking, Tin Tien saw Hua-Dang's figure in the kitchen. This shocked him greatly. The next second, he remembered Hua-Dang entering his house and could not help thinking to himself, so it was from then. The moment that thought ended, Tin Tien immediately turned away. I have to turn over. I can't face him. After all, something that embarrassing happened last night. What should I say later? Will it be really awkward? At that moment, Hua-Dang was slowly walking out, lying on the bed with his heart full of anxiety and confusion. Tin Tien thought to himself, he's coming. Forget it, I'll just pretend to be asleep. As long as I'm not awake, it probably won't be awkward, right? I'm such a genius. A steaming bowl of porridge was quickly set down on the table. Hua-Dang sat beside Tin Tien's bed. The moment he saw the ice pack set beside the pillow, he thought, still refusing to be honest, huh? Then Hua-Dang reached out to touch Tin Tien's forehead and said, "Good thing the fever has gone down." Feeling Hua-Dang's body warmth, Tin Tien could not help thinking to himself, Hua-Dang's hand is so warm. At that moment, Hua-Dang was staring at him intently, then smiled gently. Hua-Dang suddenly let out a sigh, making Tin Tien wonder he sighed. What is he sighing for? Hua-Dang said calmly, "You silly fool." As soon as he heard that, Tin Tien froze and thought, silly fool. Hua-Dang gently touched Tin Tien's face and continued, "All I did was turn down your invitation to the movies. And yet you got so upset over that you made yourself sick. Your heart really is that fragile. So how could I possibly not want to go on a date with you? It's just that I was afraid I wouldn't be able to control my feelings for you. Keeping my distance was the safest choice. Please forgive my cowardice." The moment he heard those words, Tin Tien froze completely, staring blankly as he wondered to himself, what does Hua-Dang mean by that? Meanwhile, Hua-Dang got to his feet, thinking, I'd better wait until he wakes up before eating. Before he had gone very far, his sleeve was grabbed by Tin Tien. Hua-Dang immediately turned back to look. With a shy blush on his face, Tin Tien softly asked, "What did you mean by what you just said? What feelings for me?" Hua-Dang went stiff for a moment at that question. Then he smiled and replied, "You really are a sly little fool. Who taught you that trick of pretending to be asleep?" Tin Tien hurriedly shook his head and explained, "I wasn't pretending to sleep on purpose." Even as he said that, though, he was thinking something completely different inside. I absolutely did it on purpose. See, he really is embarrassed. The very next second, Tin Tien turned serious and said, "You just said that keeping your distance from me was the safest choice. What does that mean? Why do you want to keep your distance from me? What would happen if you got close to me?" Hua-Dang looked at him with a bitter smile. Then he answered, "Once I get close, some things will change. I can't predict whether the outcome will be good or bad. I don't dare gamble on it. You're the most important person in my heart. I'm afraid of losing you. I originally thought that as long as I kept my distance, I could preserve the relationship we have now. But now I've realized I was wrong. I can't bear to see you sad, and I can't bear to see you get hurt." The moment he heard that, tears welled up in Tin Tien's eyes as he said, "What if I told you the result wouldn't necessarily be bad?" Those words made the two of them stare at each other in silence. The next second, Hua-Dang reached out and ruffled Tin Tien's hair as he said, "Then I won the bet." Tin Tien looked at Hua-Dang happily and thought to himself, "I'm such an idiot." At the same time, Hua-Dang was also thinking, "So I'm the real idiot." As he placed a hand on Tin Tien's shoulder, Hua Dang said that's how it is. The misunderstanding from before is finally resolved. As soon as she heard that, Lam Anon answered joyfully, "Really? That's wonderful." Hua Dang gently pinched Tin Tian's cheek and continued, "It's true. The two of you told me everything about your plan." Tin Tian may not have said it directly, but he did let it slip by accident. The moment he heard that, Nan Mak curiously asked, "What plan?" Lam Anon gave an awkward smile and replied, "It's nothing." That only made Nan Mak even more curious and confused. Meanwhile, Hua Dang was still chatting happily. "Getting sick once and accidentally ending up with me. Don't you feel like you must have saved the world in your last life? It wasn't for nothing that you had to suffer through being sick because of me." The moment he heard that, Tin Tian asked in confusion, "I got sick because of you?" Hua Dang said, "Didn't you? I turned down your invitation. So you got so upset you made yourself ill. That's exactly your style. Ding ten hu di den et lai. Hey, sure, I was sad that you rejected me, but I got sick purely because I enjoyed my bath too much last night and accidentally fell asleep. I didn't expect you to have such a narcissistic side." His words pierced straight through Hua Dang's fragile little heart. Meanwhile, sitting nearby, Lam Anon was so moved that she happily thought to herself, "I can't believe that in my lifetime I actually got to ship this pair." Sure enough, the most effective way to clear up a misunderstanding is to open up to each other. Tin Tian immediately looked at her and said with emotion, "This is all thanks to your method. If I hadn't been rejected, Hua Dang wouldn't have had the chance to say what was in his heart." At that moment, as Nan Mak watched the two of them talking, obvious sadness appeared on his face. Naturally, Lam Anon found it very puzzling. Nan Mak suddenly picked up his coffee and stood by the window in silence. Images of Hua Dang and Tin Tian suddenly surfaced in his mind. Nan Mak's gaze turned deeply contemplative. In his thoughts, although it was a little sudden, as Tin Tian and Hua Dang's friend, being able to see them resolve their misunderstanding and both be happy truly made him glad for them from the bottom of his heart. Then Lam On's words echoed again. Sure enough, the most effective way to clear up a misunderstanding is to open up to each other. That left Nan Mak wondering to himself, open up to each other? The very next second, he tightened his grip on the coffee cup in his hand. Memories from the past suddenly surged back into his mind. Back then, when Tring Nguyen shyly confessed, "Nan Mak, I like you." But Nan Mak had coldly rejected him. "Tring Nguyen, I always thought of you as my best friend, but right now you really disgust me." The more he thought about it, the more remorse Nan Mak felt. I could have said it clearly. Then the words of a classmate from back then rang out. "Did you hear? Tring Nguyen left a suicide note and killed himself at home. In the note he wrote, 'Sorry, I won't dirty your world anymore.'" That was exactly what had made Nan Mak blame himself all this time. Trin Nguyen would never. "Clearly, I never thought you dirted my world. I just couldn't accept it for a moment and didn't know what to do, so I said those hurtful things to you." Just then, a voice suddenly called out from afar, "Nan Mak." Nan Mak immediately turned to look. The moment he saw him, Huta greeted him with a bright smile. "Nan Mak, it's really you?" Seeing Hutu, Nan Mak was also extremely surprised. Huta smiled and said, "Yep, it's me. Old classmate, long time no see. Has it really been about 3 years since we graduated high school without meeting again? I really missed you. Why are you here? Are you working part-time here?" Nan Mak said, "Aye, you could say that." Hearing that, Huta continued, "Is that so? Me too. My brother is a sound director. I came here to help him move equipment and do odd jobs." The moment he heard that, Nan Mak couldn't help thinking, so he's Director Truong's younger brother. Meanwhile, Huta suddenly leaned closer to Nan Mak and said, "Since I ran into you, I can't help wanting to tell you a few things." Nan Mak couldn't help asking, "What things?" Hutu immediately replied, "Do you still remember Tringwin? The one who had rumors with you back in high school? He and I went to the same university. His physics department was right next to mine. I used to run into him all the time. I don't know if it was because what happened in high school hit him too hard, but Tring Nguyen has always seemed unwilling to interact with other people. He doesn't have a single friend around him, not even one person to talk to. And not only that, I heard he was bullied badly in his department. On top of that, he stopped caring about his studies and was even planning to drop out. There's only 1 year left until graduation. Wouldn't dropping out now be such a pity? Are you two still in touch?" After hearing all that, Nan Mak's face suddenly darkened as he replied, "No, I still have something to do, so I'm leaving first." Seeing that, Huta quickly added, "Hey, Nan Mac, let's add each other on WeChat. But Nan Mac paid no attention to him at all and walked away immediately. Looking at Nan Mac's attitude, Huta couldn't help thinking, he doesn't seem very happy. Did I say something wrong? I definitely said something wrong, didn't I? Meanwhile, from a distance, Lam On had heard their entire conversation. She thought in puzzled curiosity, who is that girl named Tringwen? If there were rumors linking her and Nan Mac, then Nan Mac must really have liked her. Thinking of that, she suddenly clutched at the front of her shirt over her chest, then couldn't help murmuring to herself, why does my chest feel so tight? In a recording studio, Nan Mac was lost in thought, which left Tin Tien beside him extremely confused. Little Baba isn't paying attention at all. At this rate, the director's going to call him out. The very next second, the director indeed spoke up. Cut. Nan Mac, Little Ba, let's do that take again. Nan Mac immediately answered, okay. In that situation, Tin Tien could only helplessly think to himself, what a cursed mouth I have. Seeing how distracted Nan Mac looked, Lam On, standing some distance away, could only think helplessly. Ever since he ran into Huta this morning, Nan Mac has seemed weighed down by something. Nan Mac has always worked meticulously, always striving for perfection, and yet even he can be distracted by other things. That girl named Tringwen, what exactly happened between her and Nan Mac that it could affect his mood this much? Just then, Huta suddenly appeared out of nowhere and shouted, so Nan Mac is actually Little Ba. If I hadn't asked my brother just now, I really would have thought he was only working part-time here. Startled by his sudden appearance, Lam On jumped and cried out, where did you suddenly come from? Huta smiled teasingly. Hey there, little miss. Are you Nan Mac's girlfriend? Lam ang I meditan denit eat. No, I'm not. The next second, an idea suddenly came to her. Right, Huta is Nan Mac's high school friend. He must know what happened between Trin Gwyn and Nan Mac. If I understand the situation, maybe I can help Nan Mac solve his troubles. Seeing her stare at him so intently, Huta said, Little miss, you're staring at me without even blinking. Could it be that you've been captivated by my good looks? Hearing that, Lam On could only think helplessly, why does he remind me of Senior So Do-On? Then she said, are you free a little later? There are some things I'd like to ask you about. Huta smiled and asked back, could this be some kind of invitation from you, little miss? Hearing that, Lam On was a little stunned. Some kind of invitation? Then she quickly explained in embarrassment, and no, don't get the wrong idea. As soon as she finished speaking, Lam On thought helplessly to herself, what is with this Hutu? He's way too slick. Meanwhile, Huta wore an innocent smile. That evening, they arranged to talk at a small restaurant. Lam On said a little cautiously, sorry, I hope I'm not taking up your time. Huta immediately replied, don't worry, I'm very free. If it's anything related to Nan Mac, just ask. Whatever I know, I'll tell you. Once I start talking, I tell everything. I don't hide anything. Although what I know isn't actually that much. The moment she heard that, Lam On was startled and asked, how did you know what I wanted to ask was related to Nan Mac? Huta answered calmly, you don't even need your brain to figure that out. We don't know each other at all. If you can't find me, other than asking about Nan Mac, what else could it be? Lam On had to agree with that. That's true. Can you tell me what happened between Nan Mac and Tringwen before? The moment she said it, she thought to herself, as soon as Nan Mac hears anything about Tringwen, he turns into someone weighed down with worry and sorrow. Something unpleasant must have happened between them, and that matter has been pressing on Nan Mac's heart. It's made it hard for him to let go. If that knot in Nan Mac's heart can't be untied, then every time he hears the name Tringwen in the future, he'll become just like he was today. I don't want to see Nan Mac unhappy anymore. Just then, Huta confidently said, of course I can. I know Nan Mac's business like the back of my hand. If the rumors were true, then, simply put, they talked on and on until the restaurant had started to empty out. After listening for quite a while, worry was written all over Lam On's face as she said. So in other words, although Nan Mac rejected Trin Nguyen's confession, he was actually hiding something else in his heart? Huta sighed and said exactly. He clearly rejected the confession, but he was always paying attention to Trin Nguyen. He obviously cared a lot, but always acted indifferent. Back then, Nan Mac coldly said, I won't care about you. Meanwhile, Huta kept talking. He clearly wanted to talk to Trin Nguyen, but always put on that proud, untouchable act. Nan Mac angrily pushed Trin Nguyen away and warned him, don't come near me. I won't be able to control myself. According to Hu2's account, after the matter spread, because Trin Nguyen had touched the precious cheese in the hearts of all the girls in school, he suffered a great deal of retaliation and bullying. Nan Mak clearly wanted to step in and stop it, but pretended to turn a blind eye. The more Lam Anon listened, the more she smiled awkwardly in confusion and thought, "Isn't this getting a little exaggerated? Was Nan Mak really like that?" Then she curiously asked again, "Then why did Nan Mak act like that?" Huta replied in a grave tone, "I think Nan Mak did it because he wanted to protect Trin Nguyen. Once he got close, Trin Nguyen would become the target of everyone's criticism. Girls blinded by jealousy are truly terrifying. So even if he liked him, he couldn't say it. This is just my guess, but based on my intuition, I'm 80 or 90% sure." After listening for a while, Lam Anon seemed to understand. "I see." With a sad look on her face, she added, "But then why did the two of them stop contacting each other after going to college?" Huda scratched his head and said awkwardly, "Well, think about it. Nan Mak meant well for Trin Nguyen, but Trin Nguyen didn't know that, so misunderstandings were inevitable. Trin Nguyen probably thought Nan Mak hated him. So, at that point, he began reassuring himself inwardly. Rumors saying that can't be fake, right? I didn't twist a single word, so technically I'm not lying." Meanwhile, Lam Anon sighed and thought, "So that's it. The reason Nan Mak changes the moment he hears Trin Nguyen's name is because his misunderstanding with Trin Nguyen was never resolved, and it's become an irreparable regret buried in his heart." Then she immediately said, "Then can I ask you for one more favor?" Huda curiously asked, "What favor?" Lam Anon answered seriously, "Could you give me Trin Nguyen's contact information?" Lam Anon took out her phone and snapped a picture of the number. The phone she was photographing was Hu2's. Faced with the situation, Huta could only smile helplessly to himself. "Good thing I still had everyone's phone numbers saved from when I was the class academic monitor back in 10th grade. Otherwise, this would be way too unconvincing." After it was done, Lam Anon couldn't help thanking him. "Thank you. You've really helped me a lot." Huta replied, No need to be so polite. But what do you want Trin Nguyen's phone number for? Are you planning to contact him?" Lam Anon rubbed at the corner of her eye and said, "No, I just felt like I might need it." Hearing that, Huda asked, "Really?" The next second, he stood up, ready to leave. "I've already told you everything you wanted to know. Little miss, want to go see a movie together?" Faced with his invitation, Lam Anon could only smile and refuse. "No, thank you. I still have something to do. Sorry." As soon as she got home, Lam Anon hesitated and muttered to herself, "Was I too impulsive? If Huda tells Nan Mak that I went around asking about him behind his back, will he be angry with me? Besides, even if I got Trin Nguyen's contact information, what can I actually do? Call him? And what would I even say? What do I have to contact him on Nan Mak's behalf?" Thinking of that, her eyes suddenly lowered. Then she pressed a hand to her chest and worriedly thought, "It's been hard to breathe here all day. What exactly am I so anxious about? Could it be that I'm worried Nan Mak is going to make up with Trin Nguyen?" But the very next second, Lam Anon tried patting her face and told herself, "What am I even thinking? Nan Mak isn't my boyfriend. Whoever he wants to make up with has nothing to do with me. Unless I already like him." The moment she thought that, her face instantly flushed red. She hurriedly buried her face in the pillow and thought, "But I've always liked Nan Mak. He's my favorite voice actor. No one could ever doubt that." And besides that, countless memories of her and Nan Mak suddenly came flooding back. Other than that, there was nothing else. Nan Mak was her idol. How could a fan possibly be with her idol? The next morning, she stepped out the door absent-mindedly, deep in thought, with dark circles under her eyes. So she really had stayed up all night. Today, she couldn't cheer Nan Mak on with her usual full energy. The moment Nan Mak saw Lam Anon looking like this, he asked curiously, "What's wrong with you? You look like you haven't slept in days." "Lam ein imli dan foth habai sumai." No, I slept really well. You don't need to worry." Hearing that, Nan Mak smiled. Then he gently rubbed her head and said softly, "Stop pretending to be strong. Every day you keep the same early to late schedule as I do. You must be exhausted. If you're tired, go back and rest." Nan Mak haksan lep lam ein gomleten stun. Even Nan Mak himself froze. He spoke anxiously. "Sorry. Lately Hua Dang and Tin Tien have been showing affection all the time. Maybe I got influenced by them. You should head back first." As for here, just as he was about to turn and leave, Lam Anon suddenly called out, "Nan Mak." Nan Mak immediately turned back. Lam ang some e. But she still didn't dare say it, only thinking to herself, I really don't mind you touching my head at all. Gathering up all her courage, Lam said, there's something I want to ask you. Hearing that, Ninmak asked, what is it? Lam immediately replied, it's nothing serious. I just wanted to ask, do you have any regrets? Like the kind that weighs on your heart and is hard to let go of? The more he listened, the more confused Ninmak became. Why are you suddenly asking this? Lam gave an awkward smile and explained, I told you, it's nothing serious. I just suddenly remembered that this kind of question seems to be trending online lately. You don't have to answer. I'm just going to the restroom for a bit. After saying that, she prepared to flee. However, before she got far, Ninmak said, yes. Lam ein im ditan stop. Then she listened intently as Ninmak said, back in high school, I hurt my best friend. Even now, we still haven't made up. That's my biggest regret. His words left Lam stunned. Looking at Ninmak's dejected expression, Lam couldn't help thinking, so Hutu was right. Then she immediately asked, then have you ever thought about making up for that regret? Why not? Before she could finish, Ninmak cut in, maybe he doesn't want to see me again. Just then, a voice suddenly called out from the distance, Xiao Ba, get over here and work. Seeing that, Ninmak immediately reminded her, go back and rest early. I'm heading over first. Meanwhile, Hua Dang and Tin Tien were standing at a distance, watching the two of them and chatting. I thought that cat didn't like that flashy cushion, so I threw it away. Besides, you're not a cat. How do you know cats don't like it? What if Hua really likes the flashy cushion I bought? Lam ein tao glumili nyan mak ich de jingwen. What if Tringwen doesn't think that way? While she was lost in thought, Hua Dang said firmly, there's no what if. Hearing that, Tin Tin immediately snapped back, you overbearing tyrant. But Lam paid no attention to any of that. She kept staring at Ninmak and told herself, looking at how guilty and self-reproachful Ninmak is, I really want to do something for him. Trembling as she held her phone, Lam said, what do I do? I'm so nervous my mind's gone blank. What if I can't explain things clearly over the phone and just make everything worse? What if bringing up Ninmak only stirs up his pain and resentment instead? Wouldn't that just hurt Ninmak even more? The more she spoke, the more helpless and weak she felt. Sure enough, it's better if I don't meddle. But the very next second, she said optimistically, still, if it can make Ninmak happy every day, then I'll take the risk. At once, Lam ein dian jing wensh number. The ringtone quickly began to ring. As she waited, Lam trembled and said, it's going through. However, the other side rejected the call, leaving her a little disappointed. Huh? He hung up? Is he busy? Should I try again? Lam called once more, but the phone showed that the call had ended again. This made Lam bury her face in her pillow and mutter to herself, I spent so long psyching myself up, and it was all for nothing. But why do I suddenly feel relieved? Maybe I should just go directly to his school and talk to Tring Nguyen in person. At Trin Nguyen's university, Lam wandered along while thinking, look at this stupid thing I'm doing. She helplessly shook her head and said, I rushed over here looking for someone, but I forgot that I don't even know what Tring Nguyen looks like. If I don't even know his face, how am I supposed to find him? Am I supposed to carry a loudspeaker and shout at the school gate? Just then, classes had ended and people were filing out. Holding her phone, Lam looked around and muttered, why isn't Huta answering? A voice suddenly rang out from the distance. Jing Nguyen? A group of people had gathered around Tring Nguyen and were talking to him. We're counting on you for this lab report too. Yeah, me too. Just do me the favor like always. We keep bothering you every time. It's really embarrassing, but who told you to be so nice? However, Trin Nguyen remained cold and silent, which made the group irritated. Hey, I'm talking to you. Did you hear me or not? Say something. What, are you mute? Watching the scene from afar, Lam was naturally full of confusion. They're calling him Trin Nguyen. Could it be? But isn't Trin Nguyen supposed to be a girl? At that moment, the group was still criticizing and mocking Trin Nguyen. You damn sissy, telling you to write a report for me is me thinking highly of you. Don't be so ungrateful. Fine, not saying anything, huh? If you don't speak, I'll take that as you agreeing. They joked around and burst into laughter. Meanwhile, Trin Nguyen just clenched his palms and endured it. This made Lam grit her teeth from afar and think angrily, these people are too much. How can they bully a classmate like this? Thinking that, she quickly stepped forward to help him out. Don't go too far. You're all classmates. Can't you behave yourselves? The moment they saw Lam On, that group shouted, "What's it to you? Which school are you from? Get lost. Lam ang he so ziplit. I'm not leaving. If you keep this up, I'm calling the police." Hearing that, the group burst into mocking laughter. Have you read too many novels, or what? Call the police? Go ahead. Seeing this, Tring Nguyen gently reminded her, "Classmate, just forget it. Thank you, but you don't need to stand up for me. You should go first. I'm Fina." However, Lam On answered firmly, "How can I just ignore it? Don't worry, I won't let them bully you. If you really are Tring Nguyen, how could I just stand by and watch the person in Maclex get bullied? Even if you're not Tring Nguyen, I still wouldn't just stand here and do nothing." Just then, a teacher suddenly appeared and asked, "What are you all doing?" The moment they saw the teacher, the students were visibly frightened and whispered among themselves, "Damn it, the demon's here. Boss, should we run? If that old man catches us, we're definitely getting chewed out." The very next second, the whole group hurriedly ran off in fear of the teacher. Bang Kai, Lam Kio, Nguyen Kim, stop right there. Lam On finally let out a sigh of relief and thought, that was close. Looking at her, Tring Nguyen said softly, "Classmate, thank you." Lam On immediately smiled and replied, "No need, no need. It was nothing." "All right, they called you Tring Nguyen." Tring Nguyen nodded and said, "I am Tring Nguyen. Trin as an equation, Nguyen as an aspiration. And you are." Hearing that, Lam On frowned, then hurriedly held up her phone and asked then, "Is this your phone number?" When he saw the number on the screen, Trin Nguyen looked confused. "How do you have my number?" His words instantly left Lam on dumbfounded. As if struck by lightning, she shouted, "Trin Nguyen isn't a girl." Nan Max stared at his phone. On the screen was clearly displayed the message exchange between him and Lam On. Nan Mac, "I'm not feeling very well today, so I won't be coming. You have to keep working hard today, too." "Okay, we read that far." Nan Mac thought, not feeling well. At that moment, Tin Tin beside him suddenly nudged Nan Mac with his elbow and asked, "What are you thinking about? Want to run through the lines once first?" Nan Mac quickly agreed. Back where Lam On and Trin Nguyen were, Lam On thought in stunned shock, "I can't believe Trin Nguyen is a guy. So that means the person Nan Mac likes is actually a man?" Seeing the look on her face, Trin Nguyen immediately asked from behind, "Classmate, are you all right? You don't look so well." Lam On quickly turned around to look at him. From Lam On's point of view, Trin Nguyen had red lips, white teeth, delicate features. He was clearly a handsome young man. She herself was a Fujoshi, so liking someone of the same sex should have seemed completely normal to her. But when she thought about the fact that the person Nan Mac liked was him, an indescribable sadness rose in her heart, as if the last trace of hope hidden deep within it had been completely extinguished. Just then, Trin Nguyen suddenly called out, "Miss Lam." Lam On was startled by those words. Then she said, "I'm fine. You don't need to worry about me." Hearing that, Trin Nguyen smiled and said, "That's good. You said you had something very important to tell me. There's no one else here now, so if you have something to say, just say it." Lam On scratched her cheek and answered cautiously, "Well, the reason I came to see you today is actually because I wanted to talk to you about Nyan Ma." As soon as he heard that, Trin Nguyen's expression darkened. He asked coldly, "About what?" Seeing that, Lam On hurriedly explained awkwardly, "I more or less understand what happened between you two. I came today just to tell you that Nan Mac actually likes you, so please don't misunderstand him or hate him anymore. If possible, I hope the two of you can meet once, clear up the misunderstanding, and go back to the way things were before." Hearing that, Trin Nguyen looked visibly surprised. Lam On was also smiling at him. Trin Nguyen smiled and asked, "Who told you that? About Nan Mac liking me?" Lam On explained seriously, "I know that saying these things to you out of nowhere right now might sound a little hard to believe, but trust me, Nan Mac isn't the way you think he is. He doesn't find you disgusting. Not only does Nan Mac not hate you, he even," before she could finish, Trin Nguyen cut her off. "I know. Post what lep lam aings dun." Trin Nguyen continued, "I know that Nan Mac never actually hated me. I figured that out a long time ago. But Nan Mac couldn't possibly like me. I don't know who told you that, but you must be mistaken." Hearing that, Lam On was deeply puzzled. How could that be? Huda wouldn't lie to me, would he? Trin Nguyen added seriously, "Besides, I've never resented him." As evening fell, Lam On wandered listlessly along the roadside. Her expression was heavy with thought. Trin Nguyen's words from that morning kept echoing in her mind. "I already knew everything you said. Thank you for telling me all this, and thank you for thinking on Nin Mac's behalf. But don't worry, I've never hated Nin Mac, so there's no misunderstanding between us. After hearing those words, Lam couldn't help asking curiously, if you don't hate Nin Mac, then you must still like him, right? Trin Nguyen immediately turned and left without answering. Back in the present, Lam was still worrying to herself. Trin Nguyen still likes Nin Mac, and Nan Mac likes Trin Nguyen too. Should I tell Nin Mac this? But Trin Nguyen insists that Nan Mac could never like him. Could Huda have gotten something wrong? Trin Nguyen is a guy. Does Nin Mac really feel that way about him? Just then, a voice suddenly called from afar. On. The moment she saw Nan Mac, she was completely surprised. Nan Mac, why are you here? As he spoke, Lam walked toward him. But before she had gone far, Lam was startled by a cat that appeared out of nowhere. She quickly lost her balance and fell, making Nan Mac immediately run over and warn. Be careful! Lam fell to the ground and cried out in pain. Ow, that hurts. Nan Mac quickly walked over and asked, are you okay? Lam forced a smile and answered, I'm fine. Meanwhile, Nan Mac, still full of concern, said, your leg. As Lam struggled to stand, she replied, my leg's fine. I can still walk. However, contrary to what she said, after only a few steps, her leg hurt again. Nan Mac quickly reached out to support her, then gently reminded her, careful. Lam face instantly flushed red, and Nan Mac was no exception. The two of them gazed straight into each other's eyes. Embarrassed, Lam said, sorry, but before she could finish, Nan Mac interrupted. It's fine. Your leg is hurt, so you can't walk. I'll carry you back. We need to disinfect it right away. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately picked Lam up. She was utterly startled and hurriedly said, there's no need. I can do it myself. Hearing that, Nan Mac immediately reminded her, don't move. It was the same yesterday. You obviously didn't rest properly, but you kept pretending you were fine. In the end, you still got sick. And now your leg clearly hurts a lot, but you're still holding it in and acting like you're okay. You really don't need to force yourself. The moment she heard him say that, Lam was filled with confusion. Sick? The next second, she remembered the message she had sent Nan Mac that morning. The more she thought about it, the redder her face became. I can't believe I just casually made up an excuse, and Nan Mac took it so seriously. Is he worried about me? What do I do? I like him so much I can barely breathe. At that moment, Nan Mac was still speaking seriously. Think about yourself a little too. Sometimes relying a little more on the people around you isn't necessarily a bad thing. Lam hand suddenly clutched at Nan Mac's clothes, and then she softly said, Nan Mac. Nan Mac immediately responded, Lam e. But the very next second, she tried hard to calm herself down. No, I can't. The person Nan Mac likes is Trin Nguyen. He likes boys. If I confess, I'll definitely only cause trouble for him. No, I can't. Seeing her like this, Nan Mac found it strange. What's wrong with you? Lam hurriedly shook her head and replied, nothing. Thank you. Hearing that, Nan Mac only looked at her intently without saying anything. The wound was quickly treated. His expression did not change at all. Looking at Lam he appeared calm, while she thought gloomily to herself. I almost blurted it out just now. If I confessed, what would Nan Mac say? Would he tell me about Trin Nguyen, or would he simply refuse without explaining anything? Rather than saying, I don't want to make things difficult for him, it's more accurate to say I'm afraid of facing rejection. After cleaning the wound, Nan Mac said, all done. It looks like it may have affected the bone. If it still hurts badly later, go to the hospital. Lam immediately shook her head and refused. It doesn't hurt anymore. Thank you. Sorry for the trouble. At that moment, Nan Mac asked, right? This morning you said you weren't feeling well. How are you now? Filet wit gu lam ang aquadili ziplit I'm fine now. It was just a mild cold and a bit of a headache. After taking medicine, I'm almost better. As soon as she finished speaking, Nan Mac raised his hand to feel her forehead, then smiled gently and said, no fever. Then get some good rest today. You don't need to come tomorrow. I'll head back first. Still dazed by what had just happened, Lam responded, She kept staring at Nan Mac as he opened the door to leave. Even after he closed the door behind him, Lam slumped helplessly into the chair and cried out, why wasn't I born a boy? The next day, Trin Nguyen said firmly, no, I'm not going to see him. As soon as she heard that, Lam tried to persuade him. Why not? You still like Nan Mac, don't you? Why can't you meet him once and give him a chance to tell you what's in his heart? Don't you want to restore your relationship with Nan Mac to how it was before? Trin Nguyen decisively turned and walked away as he replied, stop trying to persuade me. I'm not going to see him. I've already said it. Nan Mac could never like me. and I don't resent him at all, so there is no misunderstanding between us. As soon as she heard those words, Lam Anon asked, "Then can you tell me the reason?" Tring Nguyen quickly began explaining, back then, after I made that decision. Back in the past, he had boldly and resolutely confessed his feelings. "Nin Mac, I like you." Unfortunately, another classmate overheard it. Under those circumstances, Trin Nguyen was naturally thrown into panic. The classmate hurried away at once. "I didn't hear anything. I'm blind and deaf. You two just carry on." As soon as he entered the classroom, the girls crowded around Nan Mac and bombarded him with questions. "Nan Mac, did Tring Nguyen really confess to you? You didn't accept him, did you? Nan Mac, you absolutely must not like boys. If you do, we'll all die. That's right. If you keep hanging around with Tring Nguyen, I'll die right in front of you. I mean it." After hearing those words from them, Trin Nguyen naturally kept thinking about it. Even under that kind of intense pressure, Nan Mac never said he would cut ties with me. But because of me, he ended up going through so many things he never should have had to face. I know that after rejecting me, Nan Mac always felt awful and guilty toward me, but he didn't know how to face me. I was the same. If I hadn't been too greedy, dreaming of getting even more from him and doing something so foolish, things wouldn't have turned out like this. It's all my fault. The one who truly can't face this is me. No matter what, I can't face him anymore. Lam Anon was walking slowly down a small street. Trin Nguyen's words kept echoing in her mind. No matter what, I can't calmly face him ever again. The more she thought about it, the more curious Lam Anon became. Could the knot between Nan Mac and Trin Nguyen really never be untied? Two opposing thoughts immediately arose in her mind. Isn't this perfect? Before Trin Nguyen changes his mind, hurry up and make your move on Nan Mac. Opportunities like this don't come twice. But stealing someone else's love isn't something an honorable person would do. A forced melon is never sweet. What's most important is that the person you like is happy. The moment she thought of that, Lam Anon made up her mind at once. That's right. What's most important is that the person I like is happy. For Nan Mac's happiness, I definitely won't give up, since Trin Nguyen refused to meet Nan Mac. Then, at that moment, Lam Anon suddenly clasped her hands together and said earnestly, "That's how things are. I was wrong to contact Trin Nguyen behind your back. I'm sorry, but now this is the only way left. If you want to make up for the regret in your heart, then go see him." Hearing her words, Nan Mac, who was sitting beside her, thought to himself, as expected, she really has misunderstood something. Just then, Huda suddenly walked in from outside and greeted cheerfully, "I haven't seen you for one day, and I missed you so much." Then he added, "Hey, that little girlfriend of yours suddenly asked me about Trin Nguyen and even asked for his contact information. What's with that? Didn't you say you weren't in touch with Trin Nguyen anymore? If you're not in touch anymore, then why does little sister Anon suspect you of doing something shady? Confess honestly." As soon as he heard that, Nan Mac was puzzled. "Anh asked about Trin Nguyen." Then he quickly understood the problem. It seemed that after hearing Hu Tu's nonsense, she had become convinced that he liked Trin Nguyen. As soon as the thought crossed his mind, Nan Mac found it amusing and thought to himself, "Then I'll hold off on telling her the truth for now." His expression left Lam on utterly confused. At that moment, Nan Mac smiled lightly and said, "It's time to bring this to an end." Hearing that, Lam Anon lit up and replied, "You agreed? You're not angry with me?" Nan Mac smiled and said, "Don't be nervous. You were thinking of me, so I should be thanking you." He's atito movet lam ang deeply. She thought to herself, why is Nan Mac so gentle and understanding? Someone as perfect as him absolutely deserves happiness. At Trin Nguyen's school, Lam Anon looked at the time and said, "School's almost out." The next second, she excitedly encouraged Nan Mac, who was standing beside her. "Do your best. Make sure you properly convey your feelings to Trin Nguyen's heart." Seeing her like that, Nan Mac found it funny and just said to him, in the classroom, Trin Nguyen was sitting attentively, listening to the lecture, standing at a distance and watching. Lam Anon worried. "What do I do? Why am I so nervous?" Nan Mac must be very happy and excited. He must have so much he wants to say to Trin Nguyen, right? Come on, great God Xiao Ba. As soon as class ended, Trin Nguyen saw Nan Mac, who was standing with Lam Anon and looking in his direction. Nan Mac watched him intently, expression unchanged. Naturally, Trin Nguyen froze on the spot. At that moment, it seemed as though only the two of them remained in the whole world. Nan Mac stood still, yet someone turned and left. That person was none other than Trin Nguyen. As he hurriedly ran off, he thought to himself, why is Nan Mac? Seeing him like that, Nan Mac was momentarily stunned and called out, "Trin Nguyen." Then he immediately ran after him. He reached toward Trin Nguyen and in just a moment Nan Mak caught him and stopped him. Breathing hard, he said, "Since when did you get so fast at running?" In a small courtyard, Nan Mak and Tring Nguyen looked at each other intently without saying a word. After a while, they both spoke at the same time, "Long time no see." That made both of them freeze for a moment. Then they burst out laughing together. Meanwhile, Lam Anon stood in the distance watching them closely. Sadness and disappointment were written all over her face as she sighed. Nan Mak and Trin Nguyen were chatting and laughing happily. Then Nan Mak suddenly said, "Actually, I wanted to contact you for a long time. I just couldn't find a suitable reason." As soon as he heard that, Trin Nguyen looked surprised, then said, "Actually, me too. I've always wanted to contact you, but I felt too ashamed to face you." Nan Mak quickly explained, "Back then, I acted coldly toward you only because I was suddenly confessed to by my best friend, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to face you, so I kept avoiding you. It wasn't because I hated you for liking me." The more he listened, the more stunned Trin Nguyen became. Meanwhile, Nan Mak continued, "Trin Nguyen, I'm sorry for saying things that hurt you. I especially shouldn't have made you suffer so much that you even wanted to leave this world. I'm sorry." After hearing all that, Trin Nguyen was so moved that tears welled up in his eyes. And he quickly turned away to wipe his tears and said, "We haven't seen each other in so long, and the first thing you do when we meet again is make me cry. Really, only you could do that." Seeing this, Nan Mak remorsefully said, "I'm sorry." Trin Nguyen immediately turned back with a smile and replied, "Just kidding. You're still as serious as ever." Only then could Nan Mak smile in relief. Trin Nguyen continued, "What's past is past. We were too young and immature back then, and my mental resilience was too weak. Doing something that foolish had nothing to do with you. I've never hated you in my heart. On the contrary, I heard from classmate Lam on that. Because of this, you've kept blaming yourself all this time." Hearing that, Nan Mak looked a little stunned, while Trin Nguyen continued, "Thank you for always remembering what happened to me. Thank you for coming to see me. I'm really very happy, truly very happy." Nan Mak listened closely to him, then asked seriously, "We're still best friends, right?" That question moved Trin Nguyen so much that tears streamed down his face. The next second, he ran forward. Trin Nguyen threw his arms around Nan Mak, startling him. Holding him, Trin Nguyen smiled and said, "A hug as best friends." Hearing that, Nan Mak smiled brightly, then wrapped his arms around Trin Nguyen as well. Lam Anon stood in the distance, watching the two of them. A troubled look appeared on her face. She couldn't help thinking, "This hurts so much." Then Lam Anon quickly turned and left. The next day, Lam Anon wandered slowly down the hallway. As she walked, she kept recalling the sight of Nan Mak and Trin Nguyen from yesterday, and couldn't help thinking, even though I've kept telling myself that Nan Mak was never mine, it was still so hard to get through that long, endless night. No matter how much I tell myself to cheer up, it feels like my body is tied down by a huge stone, and I just can't lift my spirits. At that thought, Lam Anon immediately tried hard to steady herself. No. Today is Nan Mak's final day of recording. I can't go see him looking like this. Just then, she suddenly saw Nan Mak. Lam Anon immediately raised her hand and greeted him with a smile. "Nan Mak, good morning." Nan Mak slowly walked up to her and said, "Come with me." This left Lam Anon confused and curious. "Huh?" Nan Mak grabbed Lam Anon's hand and pulled her away. In the storage room, seeing Nan Mak continuously pulling her along, Lam Anon called out in confusion, "Nan Mak." The door slowly closed. Standing behind him, Lam Anon watched Nan Mak intently, then thought anxiously and fearfully, "Why did Nan Mak drag me here in such a hurry? Clearly, he already made up with Trin Nguyen yesterday. There shouldn't be any reason for me to be involved anymore. So why is he still dragging me in? Is he trying to torment a single girl who just had her heart broken all over again?" The more she thought about it, the more wronged Lam Anon felt. Seeing her like that, Nan Mak could only sigh helplessly. Then he quickly walked over and spoke gently. Nyan mak suden li so an net jem li gento sly, leaving lam kom leten dazet." She quickly stood up, feeling shy and cautious as she thought. Why did Nan Mak bring me here? What does he want to say? At that moment, Nan Mak suddenly said, "I have something to tell you. No one will overhear us here." Hearing that, Lam Anon thought, something he doesn't want others to hear? Could it be about yesterday? But I don't want to have my heart broken again, so please don't. However, before she could finish the thought, Nan Mak said, "Trin Nguyen and I have gone back to being friends." Dis shop lam anyang. Huh, friends? Nan Mak smiled and immediately replied, "That's right, friends. I know you've always misunderstood, so I wanted to explain it clearly to you. Trin and I were classmates in high school. Deep down, I always saw him as my best friend. It wasn't until that moment that I realized I was the only one who saw him as my best friend. As for Trin, I had no choice. That was a kind of feeling I couldn't accept and couldn't return. At the time, the only thing I could think of was to avoid him. Then I heard that Trin had taken pills at home in a suicide attempt. At that moment, I felt that if I hadn't said those things in the first place, maybe that wouldn't have happened to him. Trin suicide attempt failed. His mother discovered it in time and rushed him to the hospital. I thought staying silent was the best way to solve things. That time would heal everything. But even after all these years, this matter has remained like a stone weighing on my heart. Until yesterday, I was finally able to open my heart and put an end to that silence. Lam ein letzten Kolosi tahis what? Nanmak added with a smile. I owe all of this to you. If you hadn't paid attention to my feelings, if you hadn't been willing to go to all that trouble to solve my worries for me, nothing would have changed. Holding dies, lam ein was deeply situn. And Nomak. Nanmak also smiled at her and said, "Thank you, Anon. So now she won't keep misunderstanding that I like Trin anymore, right?" At that moment, Lam Anon suddenly burst into aggrieved tears and said, So that's how it was. I thought, that's great. Nanmak, that's really great. Seeing her like this, Nanmak, who had no idea what emotional whirlwind Lam Anon had been going through, felt extremely flustered. Why are you suddenly? I know you're happy because Trin and I reconciled and went back to how we were before, but Lam Anon immediately wrapped her arms tightly around Nanmak and said, I thought you and Trin had gotten together. I thought I no longer had the right to like you. You're just friends. That's really wonderful. Under those circumstances, Nanmak's face instantly flushed red, while Lam Anon still held him tightly, crying as she spoke. That's great, but in the very next second, she froze. Lam ein beluset akwadili and fausilen, then hurriedly stepped back and stammered an explanation. What did I just say? Since one had Tintien and Hua Dang appeared, they immediately cut in with glee. You said you like Nanmak. We both heard it. What the two of them said instantly made Lam On and Nanmak meet each other's eyes in embarrassment. Meanwhile, Tintien kept pushing forward and teasing them. I could tell long ago there was something going on between you two. I don't know why you've been moving so slowly without making any progress. But now it's great. Since Anon has bravely confessed, Nanmak, just say yes already. As soon as he finished speaking, a voice immediately rang out from behind. You're being way too noisy. As he pulled Tintien back, Hua Dang asked, Have you heard that story about pulling up the feathers so they'll grow better? The moment he heard that, Tintien got a little annoyed and shot back at once. It's called pulling up the seedlings to help them grow, you illiterate idiot. And just like that, the two of them started bickering again right in front of Lam Anon and Nanmak. Suddenly, the two of them met each other's gaze, and Lam Anon could not help but freeze. Meanwhile, Nanmak kept looking at her intently. After a while, both of them shyly turned their faces away. Lam Anon looked at him gently and thought to herself, that's right. Because of his silence, Nanmak had missed the chance to reconcile with his friend, so taking this opportunity to speak his heart out might not be a bad thing after all. Thinking of this, she smiled brightly and said, Please take care of me in the new semester. This is where the story ends. If you enjoyed it, please give me a like and share, so I'll have more motivation to make more videos. Don't forget to follow, so you can watch the next episodes. Wishing you all a day full of energy.